This is a world traveler, our Baba, who's been doing it all over the world, finding out from Africa now to Asia, from Europe, finding Africa in Europe, finding Africa in Mexico. I want y'all to stand up, stand up, stand up, and welcome. Come on, come on, come on, come on, and welcome our Baba, the one, the only, Dr. Professor Runoko Rashida. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Y'all know who I am, huh? You ready, Baba? Good afternoon, everybody. Hear me? Can y'all hear him?
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, at least I would imagine, the Wizard of Oz. You know, the wizard behind the curtain? All I want you to do is look at the pictures. Obviously, we don't have a cable very long, so I'm just going to sit here and show the pictures. That's what's most important. And this presentation is called Before Slavery Days. And I want to focus on the period before colonization, enslavement, and what have you. So I'm just going to show you a bunch of very rare pictures. Most of them are quite original. And I'm not going to take a lot of time. I understand there will be some opportunity for a panel discussion. But in the meantime, let me just show you the pictures with the maxim that seeing is believing and a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's give a big round of applause, though, to King Simon for everything he's doing, all the energy that he's putting out. I don't get to New York very often. I get to Brooklyn very, very rarely. And to be able to come here and be a part of a program with my Baba James Smalls and Baba Leonard Jeffries is a real honor. And it also gives me an opportunity to continue some of my own researches in the museums. So I was able to go to the Brooklyn Museum before I came here. Tomorrow I'll do the Met, and then I move on to Boston. Why am I talking about museums? Because that is going to constitute the bulk of what I'm going to show you today. I think that there's enough loot in these museums to reconstruct the entire history of African people. And that's why I invest so much time and energy into it. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with museums right here, this first photograph. Can everybody see it? Yeah. Right. Now, this is a kind of I guess this alludes to what Baba James was talking about earlier in terms of spirit and spirituality. I took a group to Ethiopia in May, and then right after that, I took another group to Kenya. And then, since I had done pretty well and felt that I needed a little holiday, I went to Zanzibar on my own. I've been to Tanzania before, but never got to Zanzibar, and I figured I would have a holiday. Nobody knew where I was. I booked my own hotel, etc., 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 and I went to a place called Stone Town, and the ancestors just seemed to say, Runoko Rashidi, whatever you thought you had in mind, forget about it, because we're going to take you on a journey, and I'm still not able to reconcile many of the things that happened. Now, one of the things that's significant about Zanzibar is that it was a kind of a slave island. It was kind of like Goree Island, except on a bigger scale. And Africans were taken from Rwanda, Congo, Burundi, Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, Ethiopia, all over East Africa, and taken to this island where it was almost impossible for them to escape, and then taken to various parts of Asia. The British abolished slavery in East Africa on June 5th, 1873. But the Arabs from Oman found it very profitable, and they kept it going. But because the British had a big stick, they had to hide the captured Africans. And this is one of the places that they hid them in. And I was able to go into a number of these. Deep, deep, deep down inside, as far as I was allowed to go. I was ready to go all the way in there, and I was stopped. You couldn't see all the way inside. And water dripped from the ceiling. It's a coral cave. Bats flying around in complete darkness. I had no plane, and I had never heard of this place before. And I found myself deep in there. And I like to start this presentation with this particular picture, because physical slavery, for the most part, is over. We hear about these terrible reports from Libya. Slavery was just abolished in Mauritania around 1980. But for the most part, what we are fighting is the psychological vestiges of enslavement, the enslavement of the African mind. And those are the chains that we must desperately seek to break. Is everybody with me so far?
Yes.
And it's also good in a sense to start with this, because this is the hole that we're trying to come out of. Unfortunately, most of us spend all of our lives in darkness without realizing that we're in darkness. So that's how I wanted to begin my presentation. Now, let me show you a series of things before we get to the museum pieces. Yeah, and I think I would like a chair too. I'm getting old, man. Let's hope I don't fall out of it. In fact, let's just leave it. Let's just leave it. Now, some of the great African heroes and sheroes who come from more recent experience. For example, this is Jean-Jacques Dessalines. This is the first emperor of Haiti. We can never really repay the debt that we owe the sisters and brothers in Haiti, who are still suffering as a result of their attempt to throw off enslavement. And Jean-Jacques Dessalines is a person that we don't hear as much about as we do about Toussaint or Boukman or Christophe. But he had a real serious attitude about Europeans. And he's the first emperor of Haiti. This is my brother, my ancestor. This is Martin Robeson Delaney. He gave us the expression, Africa for the Africans. Garvey changed, in fact, he said, Africa for the Africans with black men to rule them. That was the way people talked at that time in the 19th century. Garvey modified it to be Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. Delaney is the first African scholar that I'm aware of, African-American scholar, to wear African clothes when he lectured. He went to what is now Nigeria about 1868 or so, looking for a place to resettle, and bought all these beautiful African clothes. And so he started this tradition, Minister Brown, of wearing African clothes when he gave lectures. And even now, I'll put mine on. This is the great Martin Robeson Delaney. And then this is Edward Wilmot Blyden, a compatriot of Delaney. He is from St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. He visited Kemet in 1866 and wrote about it in 1869. I'm going real quick. From Haiti, the great African scholar Antoine Firmin. Around 1880 or so, a Frenchman named Gobineau wrote a book called The Inequality of the Human Races, in which he established a kind of a racial hierarchy. This brother from Haiti debunked that. He said that's a myth, that there's only one race and that's the human race. And this is in the 1880s. Brilliant scholar, and his work has now been translated into English. And of course, Marcus Garvey, who wasn't a historian, but he understood the importance of history. Just like Malcolm, who was to come 40 years afterwards. If I had been around at that time, Garvey and I would have been real tight. All the great scholars worked around Garvey. J. Rogers, Carter G. Woodson, with very diverse backgrounds. But Garvey was the centerpiece. And this is from his tomb in Jamaica, Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, who took Garveyism or pan-Africanism back to Africa itself. Nkrumah leads the Gold Coast Ghana to independence on March 6, 1957. And he immediately says the independence of Ghana doesn't mean anything unless all of Africa becomes independent. And the only way Africa could really be free was to unite. This is a powerful man here. In 1958, a year after independence, and by the way, you know who was at that independence ceremony? Martin Luther King was there. Chancellor Williams was there. I would have been there. Okay? Now, in 1958, he had another conference called the All-African Peoples Conference, and this is the first big Pan-African conference held in Africa itself. Patrice Lumumba left the Congo for the first time. Robert Mugabe was there. Frantz Fanon was there. Amilcar Cabral was there. Sekou Touré from Guinea was there. As a matter of fact, Guinea became the only former French colony to demand its independence. Charles de Gaulle went around Africa and talked to the Africans in the French colonies and convinced them to stay with France. Only Sekou Touré decided that Guinea was going to become independent. And so the French made an example of Guinea. They took the chalkboards, they took the light bulbs, they took the trash cans, as if to say, we're going to show you people you cannot exist without us. You know what Nkrumah did? He gave Guinea the entire national treasury of Ghana. That's unprecedented. And when Nkrumah himself was overthrown, Sekou Touré invited Kwame Nkrumah to be the co-president of Guinea. That's deep stuff. Uh-oh. Well, I haven't had sleep in about 3 days, so. Here's Renoka Rashidi. Yeah. Renoko is not important. What's important is Carter G. Woodson in front of this statue in Washington, D.C. And let us not forget the African women historians. This is the great Drusilla Dungy Houston, who in 1926 wrote a book. Now we just need to adjust the mic. I want to fight this, please. All right, now we're in business. Wrote a book called One of Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire. She also covered the destruction of Black Wall Street. I think a lot of times the sisters in our struggle don't get the credit and recognition that they deserve. Because a lot of us have developed the same kind of patriarchal attitudes in the African conscious community. We're just imitating Europeans. So you can't really talk about the destruction of white supremacy without talking about the uplift of the African woman. You can't separate the two. Of course, Sheikh Anta Diop, a great African scholar from Senegal, who made Egyptology a kind of a science. From Brazil, we have Abdias do Nascimento, the great African scholar from Brazil, kind of like a prince. He is the great African scholar that massive black population has produced. This one I call the quartet. There's a brother named Charles Ogborn who took this picture. And here you see four of our most titanic figures. You see the great John Henry Clark, the great Chancellor James Williams, the author of Destruction of Black Civilization, the great Dr. Joseph Benyakinen, and the great John G. Jackson, the light-skinned brother, who you know we range a complexion from snow to crow and bright to night. And these are four of the greatest scholars we produced, and they had a good influence. A little photograph, I guess it's appropriate, of me introducing John Henry Clark when I was a youngster. I asked Dr. Clark, what should I say as an introduction? He said, don't make it too long and don't make it sound like an obituary. I love John Henry Clark, and I still do. Of all the scholars, he's the one I think that I miss the most. When I come back from a trip from Russia or Vietnam or Mali or some far corner of the earth, I say to myself in my delirium, in my fatigue, I'm going to call Dr. Clark. And I'm going to tell him what I saw. And I want to get his opinion about it. That is the impact that he had on me. And I'm sure I speak for many others when I say that. Dr. Clark, when you talk to him, you always knew he loved you. You always knew that he loved his people. He is a true, what we call, race man. And then here's my favorite photograph with Dr. Benyakinen. This was taken in February 2011 downstairs in his apartment in Harlem. I had a chance to travel to Egypt as his personal assistant on 4 occasions. And in Egypt, Dr. Ben came to life. He liked to be the center of attention, but he had a big sense of humor. And I saw the heart of this man. And I saw how he interacted with the local people, the Nubians in particular. Dr. Ben, I think his contribution, his legacy is threefold. One, he made it plain. He spoke in a way that anybody could understand and appreciate. You didn't have to have a PhD from Harvard to know what he was talking about. Number two, he talked about the African roots of major world religions. And then maybe the biggest thing of all, for me at least, he took people to Kemet before anybody else so you could see it for yourself.
That's right.
There's nothing like seeing it for yourself. Once you see it, nobody can take that away from you.
Right.
I started giving lectures on Egypt way back in the 1980s, but I hadn't been, and people started to challenge me. People would look for chinks in your armor, and they would say, but Renoko Rashidi, have you been there? And I started lying. I said, you know, my mother was born in Egypt, and every summer, just a complete lie. And finally, through the First World Forum, through Bill Jones and Mother Kefa, I was able to go to Egypt with Dr. Ben in 1991. I was so high when I came back. The first lecture I gave in Los Angeles, I think I actually levitated off the ground. Egypt, being an African itself, is a life-changing experience. I wish all of y'all could go. If you haven't been, see it, smell it, feel it, eat the food, be with the people, and it will change your life. Tell you a quick story. My early travels to Egypt, my early travels to Africa were all in Kemet. Finally, in the year 2000, I was invited to Southern Africa. I did some big lectures in Zimbabwe and Namibia, in front of thousands of people. And every time I would give a lecture, the same thing would happen. I'm in the middle of the talk, and all at once I started talking about these dreams, these nightmares I had been having. And they were twofold. One is, I was in my neighborhood somewhere, but I could never find my home. I knew I lived around here somewhere, but no matter what alley, what boulevard, what street, what avenue I went to, I could never find my home. And actually, that was very unsettling. And the other dream was, I would go visit my family in Los Angeles where I grew up, and they wouldn't want me to be there. And they would make that very clear to me. They wouldn't eat with me. I couldn't sleep on the bed. They'd make me sleep on the floor. And that's crazy. My family and I are very, very, very close. And I realized in Africa, in Southern Africa, that those dreams had a much greater significance than I ever realized. And that because we were taken from our homes, a lot of us deep in our psyche, I think, have a strong sense of homelessness. Where do I come from? And where do I belong? And because we were separated from our families, I think there's a fear, there's an anxiety about relationships. And I would say that. And the audience to a person, it happened every time we say, but Renoko, this is your home. And we are your family. You know, I never had those dreams anymore after that. Being in Africa exercised those demons that all of us have deep in our minds without even realizing that. Dr. Ben was the first of us that I'm aware of to actually take large groups to Africa so you can see the pyramids for yourself. And then here's John G. Jackson. He wrote Man, God, and Civilization, Ages of Gold and Silver, Was Jesus Christ a Negro, The African Origin of the Garden of Eden, Christianity Before Christ, and a staunch atheist. If you were a Christian and you were around John G. Jackson, you were going to have a real hard afternoon because he was not going to spare you. Right. And then the great Ivan Van Sertima, maybe my greatest mentor. I worked with Ivan for 25 years. As you know, he was the leading authority in the world on the African presence in ancient America, but also the founder of the publication, the Journal of African Civilizations. And you know, I took a group to Mexico a few months ago. I've been taking groups to Mexico for 5 years to see the Olmec heads in black communities. And on this particular trip, there were a number of young people. I'm 64 now, so a lot of people are young now. And there were some kids, forgive me for saying it, in their late 20s and early 30s, and they were asking me questions like, Dr. Rashid, have you ever heard of a woman named Frances Welsing? Do you know this man, Ivan Van Sertima? And it never occurred to me that a lot of people don't know who these folk are. Now, this is a classic. And this was sent to me by my brother, Tony Browder. There's a legendary, now he really is a legend, Leonard Jeffries. And there's the great Dr. Asa Grant Hilliard III in the middle. And there I am, and we're at the wedding of Tony Browder in Cape Coast, Ghana. Now that's a classic picture, isn't it? And Rosalind is over there somewhere. This is Mother Tanetta Muhammad, the widow of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who for some reason liked me and thought I was a great scholar. I know she was confused, I shouldn't joke. She thought I was a great scholar, and she would come to my lectures. And in April 2011, she invited me to come to Mexico with her to lecture to African Mexicans, sisters and brothers who have the lowest self-esteem of any group of black people I've ever met, except the black untouchables of India. This is Gail Hansberry, and she's the daughter of William Leo Hansberry. William Leo Hansberry was a Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark of his day in the 30s and 40s. I never met him. He died before my time. But I met his daughter at a recent presentation in Washington, D.C., and she says, you know, my dad would have loved your work. It just a thrill went through me when I heard that. I don't want to leave the sisters out. This is Dr. Adelaide Sanford. You know, when she speaks to you, and she's got to be about 91 now, she always says, and my beloveds, and she says it in a manner, it really makes you think she believes that, and she feels that. And now this is a true African queen. Here I am with Senator Bill Perkins and Nana Camille Yarborough receiving an award at the Schomburg. And this is Marimba Ani at a UNIA convention, an author of Urugu. I don't think we give the sisters enough credit, so this is my opportunity to make up for it. This is Dr. Karen Ann Johnson, and she's the world's leading authority on the African-American scholars or educators Anna Julia Cooper and Nanny Helen Burroughs. We're in Mexico in front of an artifact called El Negro. Yeah, that means the black. That's what the people who dug it up called it. This is an Olmec artifact that you never see. White scholars be talking about the Olmec, they just leave this out of the discussion because they're intellectually corrupt. Why is history important? This is where I'm going day after tomorrow. This is Boston, and this is a hotel I stayed in a few years ago. This is a hotel that Malcolm X used to work in. And I didn't realize it at the time. Now I use this picture of Malcolm because it's very, very profound. Now we know Malcolm, our black shining prince, and Malcolm's parents were Garveyites, even though Malcolm at some point in time went astray and became tantamount to a common criminal. And he was incarcerated, unfortunately. He came under the influence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He read J. Rogers, he read Carter G. Woodson, and he was transformed. What better example could I give to show the importance of knowledge of self? What better example could I give? Because people will say, Renoka, why is this important? Why should I care about what happened yesterday? I don't have a job. My woman done left me. I got a warrant out. And here you talking about African history. Well, I would say if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. How do you plan for today and tomorrow if you don't know what happened yesterday? What you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. So if you're told you don't have the history, that you come from nothing, you'll embrace the N word. You won't run from the B word. It'll roll easily off your tongue. But if you know you come from greatness, you will aim for the stars. No goal is too much for you to achieve. And this is what we must instill in our youth. The sense that you come from greatness, you come from royalty. Act like it. Achieve it. Build on that. That's why history is important. Of course, one of my favorite images of Malcolm X giving the great J.A. Rogers, who lived in New York for such a long time, a big award. This is from Muhammad Speaks newspaper around 1960. This is interesting. This was my third trip to Cuba. I've been taking groups there the last couple of years. On the one side of this is a plaque of Martin Luther King. I didn't know it. All we had to do was walk on the other side and there's a plaque of Malcolm X. Wow. Another example of the importance of history. This is a brother I went to high school with, Stanley Tookie Williams. One of the most fearsome brothers that ever lived. The co-founder of the social organization, aka gang called the Crips. We went to high school together. Now and then he'd walk up on the bus stop and see me and say, give me a quarter. And sometimes I'd give it to him and sometimes I'd give him the middle finger and got away with it, right? This is before I knew who the Crips were. If I knew who the Crips were at that time, I said, here's 50 cents, you take it, please. They didn't have the reputation that they developed. 20 years passed by. And Tookie went on to do his thing, and I went on to do my thing. By this time, through working with Dr. Van Sertima, my work had been circulated in the prisons. And I'm getting all kind of letters, I still do, from brothers in the penitentiary all the time. Can you send me a book? Well, one time it went beyond that. And a woman came up to me, or contacted me, and says, my friend is on death row. And he and two other brothers, former members of the Crips, are also on death row. And they've written a book about African history and African children and African poetry. And they heard about you. And they want to know if you could help get it published. What a relationship we developed. And Tookie would call me from death row, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning, and cry like a baby. He wasn't afraid to die. I don't think he was afraid of anything. But he was so angry at the way he spent it. He felt that his life had been wasted. He was a natural leader. And he would say, Renoko, if only I knew my history then, if only how different life would have been. And this is what I have to tell the young people. I started doing this presentation at Purdue University in February. So I developed it with young people in mind. My recent books is my most recent book, My Global Journeys in Search of the African Presence. My first book for children, Asada Garvey, that's my daughter. I took her and her mother to Egypt with me 2 years ago. I wanted to be able to say that my daughter saw the pyramids for the first time with her daddy. I think I'm a very good historian. I work at it very hard. But what I'm most proud about is being a good father. That brings the balance to my life. Unfortunately, my daughter doesn't seem to give a hoot about my work. I took her to Los Angeles last year. She stayed with me for the Christmas holidays. I took her in my studio. I said, honey, how do you like my library? She said, Dad, you have a magnificent library. As soon as you die, I'm going to sell all these books and get the money. That's how my daughter thinks. She didn't mean any harm. That's just her focus, okay? And so what does that mean? That means if biological family doesn't accept what you do, you need extended African family. That's why this gathering today here is important, because a lot of times the people who are closest to us are the ones who reject us the most. And so we must reach beyond that. Ivan Van Sertima said, Renoko, the worst thing is to feel that you are alone. And this is my book dedicated to Dr. Van Sertima. My little travel notes. My book on the African presence in early Europe. My sixth book on the African presence in early Asia. These images that I'm going to show you now are what the first modern human beings look like. This is a reconstruction, according to scientists, of the first modern human. From Morocco, the first one we have bones of, we can do DNA analysis and reconstruction, 160,000 years ago. He looks like 50 Cent. This is what BBC says the first people of Eastern Europe look like. This is what the scientists in England say the ancestor of the Brits was. This is 10,000 years ago. And this is a brother called Cheddar Man. Cheddar was the place these bones were found over 100 years ago. And now they've been reconstructed through DNA analysis. So the British must really be having a tough time. You got this sister that's been married into the royal family, and then they find out that their very ancestor was black. They must be suffering, saying, oh my God, what did I do to deserve this punishment? This is out of place. This is from Asia. These are reconstructions of the first people of the Far East. And this is a reconstruction of Lucia. Lucia is the first person that we know of in the Americas. This is a reconstruction of a skull found in Brazil that's at least 11,500 years old. And this was damaged in a fire in Rio de Janeiro in September. Fortunately, we just found out that the skull survived. This is representative of the first people of the Americas. So the question is, where do white people come from? Because until quite recently, there wasn't none of us. There wasn't none of them. Humanity began in Africa and only Africa. And those Africans went out to people the world long before the Ma'afa, long before enslavement. Here's another piece from Brazil that's been reconstructed. A black man who lived in Brazil 10,000 years ago. And this is what I do. For the last 20 years, I have not unpacked a suitcase. And during that period of time, I've been able to visit 121 countries. In some cases, over and over and over again. I just got back from Egypt Monday. It was my 24th visit. And this is one of my favorite photographs. This is with the Batwa, the so-called pygmies, on the border of western Uganda and eastern Congo. So for years, I traveled around the world visiting these diverse black communities. But right now, my big thing is the museums, and that's what I'm going to get into now. Here's another photograph illustrating that in the British Museum. And finally, the archaeological sites. This was where I was on my 60th birthday, visiting the ruins of Pompeii. Now, the museums. This is the Ashango bone. And all these photographs are originals. Very rare. These are pictures, for the most part, I took myself. And I'll dedicate this presentation to King Simon. Okay? Give him another round of applause for all the sacrifices that he makes. Now, this is the Ashango bone. It's 25,000 years old. It's in the Natural History Museum in Brussels, Belgium. Africans were engaged in mathematics 25,000 years ago. And this is not the oldest counting stick from Africa in the world. And then, of course, we have to stroll through the Nile Valley. This is the Taseti incense burner. On the side is a man seated on a throne, 6 generations before the first dynasty of Kemet. Just a cheesy little map of Egypt. And then we're going to go through the dynasties. A dynasty is a family of rulers, one member of the family coming after the other for an extended period of time. This is the last known ruler of the pre-dynastic phase. His name is the Scorpion King. This is at Oxford University. And this is Ahamena. This is Narmer. Sheikh Anta Diop identified him as the first pharaoh. And this is King Djoser. This is the king under whom Imhotep worked. And also another brother that you may not be familiar with named Hesi Ray. Hesi was the chief of dentists, and he's considered the world's first surgeon. He is a contemporary of Imhotep, and they both served under this king, Joseph. Look at that hair, look at those locks. This is nearly 5,000 years ago. And of course, this is the tomb that was built for him, what we call the step pyramid, and there it is up close, and there's the brother who designed it. Genius man, Imhotep. If there was one person I was going to nominate as the greatest African in history, Imhotep would probably be that person. He was not of royal birth, and yet he did things that we still talk about today. And for those of you who have doubts about his ethnicity, I show you this picture of his mother. This is a little statue in the Louvre in Paris. One day I was walking through the Louvre, and a voice seemed to call me and says, "Renoko, turn around and look at me." And this statue seemed to be calling my name. Now, there should be no doubt about her ethnicity, but if there is, I compare it to these sisters from the Omo Valley, Sister Yah in southern Ethiopia. Let's look at it again. A bunch of these. This is not a coincidence. I don't think we study Egypt too much, but I would like to see us connect ancient Egypt with the rest of Africa more effectively, because Egypt was an African civilization. And there's another one. You see the comparison? This is King Huni. I photographed this again this morning in Brooklyn. One of the pyramid builders. This is his pyramid. And there I am in that pyramid chamber. This is King Sneferu, the father of the king called Khufu, builder of the Great Pyramid. And this is his pyramid. And this is King Khufu. This is the builder of the Great Pyramid. And this photograph has been identified as King Khufu just within the last 2 or 3 years. I took these pictures in Germany in January 2017 and 2018. Let me show you again. Look at that happy to be nappy hair. I could do a whole presentation. In fact, I want to do it just on hair, because that should tell the tale right there. His pyramid ship, where it was buried. The Great Pyramid and the pyramid of Khufu's son Khafre. And this is Khafre. You can always tell this pyramid because it still has limestone on the top. This is probably what the pyramids actually look like. They're made of granite, but they were coated with limestone. And they were buffed, and they were polished, and they shined them up. Now the Great Pyramid, the pyramid of Khufu I just showed you a moment ago, sits on 13 acres. And it's 486 feet high. And it's composed of 2.3 million blocks of hard granite stone that weigh about 5,000 pounds each. And when it was finished, it glittered like a diamond. Now imagine that, a diamond 486 feet high, sitting on 13 acres of land. This is what our ancestors did. We may never build another pyramid, but we are capable of doing great things. That's the whole point. All right. Khafre again. And of course, a lot of people believe that he is responsible for having this monument Hormaki carved in his own likeness. This one I show because this drawing was done 50 years before Napoleon. A lot of us are led to believe that Napoleon trained his artillery on the face of Hormaki, the Great Sphinx, and that's a complete myth. And I'm the last person to defend Napoleon, believe me. But this was done 700 years ago by a group of Muslim fanatics. And Napoleon just got a bad rap. There's a close-up. This is what I love to see. I love to see black men and black women together.
Amen. I say.
Black love is the greatest form of resistance to white supremacy. Now here's a brother that is racially and I'm going to put it on the brothers more than anybody. Racially, because there are a lot more sisters than brothers. See, let me just tell you what I was going to tell you before I digress. Here's a brother racially profiled from cradle to grave. When you walk in the store, the security guard focuses on you because he just assumes you're going to steal something. You're the last one to get the job, the first one to get fired. Usually you're the first one to get killed in the movie. And yet a brother will quite often tell you when he got that blonde, I couldn't help who I fell in love with. Are you stupid? You couldn't control your emotions? What do you mean you couldn't help it? That you don't see color, you don't see race. More than anything, the idea of black men not being with black women frightens me. Because if we're not talking about black love, what are we talking about? What's the point? How can you not see color? Are you Mr. Magoo? Are you Stevie Wonder? It's all around you. Look at how they are holding and embracing one another. You do not see this in Greco-Roman art. You might see two men holding one another. You might see a man and a goat, a man and a pig. You might see a bunch of women holding one another, but you will not see a man and a woman in Greco-Roman art. Plato thought that the idea of a romantic relationship between a man and a woman was a form of insanity. That's a platonic relationship.
Tell the truth.
So here we use a lot of these cast-off terms without really understanding what we're talking about. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in a platonic relationship. Look how proud they are to be together. And she is not inferior. In ancient Africa, the black man's sense of security was so powerful that he did not feel threatened by the black woman. The line of descent is traced through the female side of the family. All right. From Dynasty 5, more pyramids. And that is what Baba James was talking about. These are the pyramid texts. This is from the tomb of a 6th dynasty, a pharaoh named King Teti. This says it all. Now here is a king who became the king of Egypt when he was only 10, and he died on the throne at the tender age of 104. But his mother is the throne here, as you can see. I love black women, and I'm not scared of them. I don't run from them, I run to them. And I can never say enough good things about black women. And if you ever have anything bad to say about black women, don't come around me. Just keep stepping. We're just going through the dynasties. Now this is Nefertiti and Imhotep II. This is the first time that I'm aware of that we see the color black used in ritualistic fashion. We know that these were black people, they were Africans. But black also had a symbolic importance. And the color black represented deification. It represented divinity. Make a long story short, the color black was the color of God. And for some of us, it still is. And this is his queen, because what good is a king without a queen?
Right.
Look at the hair. More hair. I flew all the way to Lisbon, Portugal to make this photograph. And I joke and not joke, I tell people, you know, I used to have an afro like that, and the audience just burst out laughing. They can't imagine that. So I decided to put this picture from Somalia in there, and then just for good measure, I put a picture of me in there when I was 18. I did have an afro, and you know who that is standing next to me? That's my father. And next to him is his brother, my uncle Justus. That was his name, Justus. And this guy is the toughest brother I think I ever met. I've been traveling most of my life, and you know how I started traveling? I started traveling to San Quentin to visit him in maximum security prison because he shot a cop in the 1950s.
Yeah.
It took a pair of them to do that. From Dynasty 12, the 12th dynasty, you can see, if you see a comparison here. All from the 12th dynasty, look at these locks. This is my favorite king, Amenhotep III. Those big Barack Obama ears. The idea was the bigger the ear, the more you could hear. The more you heard, the more you would know. The more you knew, the more power you would possess. This is in Vienna, Austria. Can't get any more African than that. In Copenhagen, Denmark, in the form of a sphinx. Look at the hair. The first known example of martial arts. This is in the Bani Hassan tombs 4,000 years ago. I'm going to take a group there next year. From the 18th dynasty, Thutmose I. And this is, I've been saying this is Hatshepsut right here. Hatshepsut is the most powerful of the female kings, the female pharaohs, and this is her temple. And on that temple is his full-figured sister, who is the queen of the land of Punt, the land of God, according to the people of Kemet. Her nephew, Thutmose III, a great militarist, and his obelisks are taken. One of them is down in Istanbul, Turkey. And here's God Amen painted black. That's where we get the expression, Amen. And this is Amenhotep III. This is the husband of Queen Tai, the father of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's grandfather, Nefertiti's father-in-law. I found this one in the Netherlands in a town called Leiden. He reigned for 38 years. He is maybe the greatest king in the history of Kemet. Look at that African face. Look at it hard, because you ain't going to see it on the Discovery Channel or the Learning Channel, and you damn sure ain't going to see it on BET. It ain't going to be on Empire or Scandal or Greenleaf or whatever it's called. Here he is again and again and again. But what good is a king without a queen? This is Queen Tai. And there she is as a young sister. And again and again. And looking serious. And that's the one. That's the one we've all seen. This is what a regal African queen looked like in ancient Egypt. And there they are together. And two of their daughters. And just to compare with these two girls in Ghana, I used to teach school in Ghana. And one of the things about some African countries, when the girls go to school, they make them keep their hair cut short until they're about 14 or 15. So the hair is not an issue. You don't see them with a weave down to their waist. And you don't see brothers with their pants sagging. I love to teach school there. I never have to say, sit up, be quiet, stop texting, stop sexing. I'm talking, and I don't have to pass through a metal detector. And these young people act like they want to learn. They are an open vessel.
Yes.
And to me, they're adorable. One of the sons of Imhotep III and Queen Tai, and compared to this photograph of his young brother in the middle, look at the attitude this little boy has. Like, Dr. Rashid, you better get this picture straight, okay? Because otherwise, we're going to have a long talk. This is Akhenaten, identified as the world's first monotheist, although Africans always knew that God was one. These pictures are so lifelike, it's almost like they could talk to you. And of course, Nefertiti, the ones you don't see. Look at those beautiful lips. Only a black woman can have lips like that. I'm standing in front of the ruined palace of Nefertiti at Amarna. I'm going to take a group there next year. Nefertiti pouring Akhenaten a goblet of wine and holding hands. Romantic love. These Africans actually fell in love with each other. They were romantic. And they wrote love poems, and they liked to make love, and they liked to party, and they liked to drink wine and drink beer, and they ate well, and they liked to wear their good clothes, and they liked to smell good. I can relate. It's so easy to identify with them. If we were to go in a time warp and be transported back to Kemet 2,000 years ago, we would fit right in. Why? Because ancient Egypt was an African civilization. It's not hard to understand. And look at these Amarna heads. These aren't aliens. They didn't come from another universe. And you can compare, no, it's not the best picture, with the heads of these Africans from Central Africa. These are the young girls as they grew up. And this is in their tomb. I'm the only person that I know that's been in the tomb of the daughters of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And I had to pay a hefty bribe of about $50 to take that photograph. But I had to have that photograph, because once I saw those booties, I had to show it to the world. Because it tells the whole story. In the tomb. This is called A Stroll in the Garden. King Tut and his beautiful young bride. And these are images of Tutankhamun you rarely see.
That's right.
This is Amos Nefertari, a black woman who was deified. An unknown king. In one of those tombs. A banquet scene. This is what we use on the cover of my calendar. And hair extensions. Yes, hair extensions. All I can guarantee is that they didn't get them from the Koreans on the corner. That's all I can tell you. Or the Vietnamese. Michael Jackson. Are you drinking too much? Because it does look like Michael Jackson. It's in the alkaline water. Okay. Now, this is in the field museum in Chicago.
Crazy.
And Michael Jackson was born in Gary, Indiana. I've been to his house. 45 minutes away from that museum. Michael was brilliant. A little confused on some levels, but brilliant. And he had consciousness. And I can't help but wonder if he saw that and had his cosmetic surgery based on that. All right, there's King Simon trying to be cool, but I think that's a signal I better hurry up. People tell you take your time right before they put you out. That's what they always take your time, right? Ain't no rush. Dr. Jeffries will never be on time. But he'll be here, and he'll be worth the wait. This is Seti I and his son Ramses the Great, and two priests. Ramses as a youth. This is a temple that Seti I and Ramses the Great. We're in the 19th dynasty now. Remember, dynasties are family of rulers, or remember the family coming after the other for an extended period of time. It was believed that the head of Osiris, Asar, is buried in there somewhere. And these blocks are massive. And then, of course, this same temple, or the temple in front of that, what I just showed you, has these objects, which looks like a whirlybird and a helicopter and a submarine. Or a whirlybird, which is a helicopter, a submarine, and some kind of flying object. This is 3,200 years old. And I've never gotten a good explanation for this. And this is also where you have the Immaculate Conception, where Asar, who is a resurrected savior, but who has been castrated, his wife Aset, who invented the concept of domesticity and invented the wedding ring, who was also a magician, could change form and turn into a bird and fluttered over the body and became pregnant. And this is where you see the best example of it. We know it's Aset because the name Aset means the throne. This is who the world knows as Isis. But Aset means the throne, and you see a little throne in front of the bird. All these are Ramses the Great, who lived to be about 90, who had about 300 children, who is a warrior king, but signed the world's first peace treaty. This is in Warsaw, Poland. This is a necklace he used to wear. Look at that nappy hair. This is in Budapest, Hungary. You see what I've done with my life? This is my obsession. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. And this is the thing that I do. And I try to do it well. Why? Because our ancestors paid a price for us to be able to do what we do. We're not just here because we are strong or we are brilliant. Our ancestors paid a price for us to be sitting in this room today. We should always acknowledge that. And pave the way for future generations. Our sister who did the libation spoke to that. What will future generations say about you and me? And what will your statement in life be? All right. And of course, Abu Simbel and the Tekken of Ramses II. This is in front of Luxor Temple, and this is the one that was taken away. This is now in Paris. So there are two of these. Ramses painted black. Ramses and his great love, Nefertiti. From a coffin lid, this is in Poland. Look at how detailed the braids are. This is in the Musée du Louvre in Paris. Another early example of martial arts. This is at the Temple of Medinet Habu in Kemet. This is Ramses III. This is a Kushite. He's from the land of Kush. I know when a lot of y'all think of Kush, you're not thinking about a land in the Valley of the Nile. Well, I'm from California, so I know better. And here you are. Now, my brother Yasir Rahotep says this is Kemetic yoga. Other people say she's an acrobat or a dancer. I could easily do that, but I don't want to take the time to clear the table, and I don't want to embarrass the young people in the room, but next time I come, I'm going to do this for you. Asar, the Lord of the Perfect Black. I said in Heru, and look at these. Now, these are pictures I was not supposed to take, but I had a little cell phone, and there was nobody around, and I didn't think these sisters would mind. This is 3,000 years ago, and these are the queens of the 20th, 21st, and 22nd dynasties. I show you three of them. Her name is Najmet, and this is Hinatawi. Look like she just died not long ago. And here's the third. I snuck these photographs. I guess snuck is a word. But these pictures, I think, tell the story. We should not have to have discussions in 2018 in November as to whether these were African people who built the pyramids. That's beneath, to me, intellectual exchange. I won't argue with people about it. But some folk, no matter what you say, no matter what evidence you present, they're never going to believe. They've made up their minds that we never did anything. And I will not devote time to them. There are enough people with open minds that I want to appeal to. For those who believe, no proof is necessary. For those who don't believe, no proof is ever enough. So I would not argue. This is Amarna. She's the most powerful woman in the world 2,700 years ago. She was the governor of the city of Waset. Her power was tantamount to that of the pharaoh herself. In fact, the pharaoh was her brother. This is King Shabaka and King Taharka, and Taharka again in Dynasty 26, the last native ruler of Kemet. The woman here, I hope you can see her, is Cleopatra VII. And before I go any further, let me apologize a bit to the technicians. They worked very, very hard to set this up. I was a little frustrated because we had to put it in the corner. But these sisters and brothers quite often never get the recognition that they deserve, but they are the ones who make these programs work. So my brother, I apologize, okay, if I was a little short. Thank you for everything you're doing. Our brother from the Greco-Roman period in Egypt, from Kush, and my brother Tony Browder, I took this picture in Kush, in Sudan. These are the Kintakas, the Queen Mothers, the holy mountain of Gebel Barkal, where people believe the spirit of Amun dwells. And this is where we stayed. I took a group there 2 years ago. We actually spent the night out there. We pitched tents. You had to really want to be on this trip. 110 degrees for days at a time, no running water, no showers, no flushing toilets, in complete darkness. You had to really want it. And yet it was a trip of a lifetime. And I think everybody who was on that trip is ready to say, Renoko, when you going to do it again? This is all from the Sudan. This is the Julia of the Kintakas, the Queen Mothers. This is the land of gold. And look at these young brothers. Look at how dignified they look. This is deep in Sudan, north of Khartoum, but I was able to get them to crack a smile too. And this pretty little Nubian girl, doesn't she look adorable? You're talking about a brat. She made fun of my bald head. She made fun of my bow legs. She got mad at me because I didn't want to spend $10 on this doll that had been made in China. And I really thought, I wonder if she could float in the Nile, because I was really thinking terrible, terrible thoughts. These are brothers in South Sudan. Now that's black. And I looked at them and they looked at me and they said, Dr. Rashidi, is something wrong? I said, yeah, something's wrong. And they said, what? I said, I'm jealous. They said, jealous of what, Dr. Rashidi? I said, y'all so black. And they said, come stay for about 1,000 years and you'll look just like us. And there he is. Christ arisen. The Coptic Christ. Emerging from his tomb after the crucifixion. This is in the Coptic Museum in Cairo. With an afro and fair skin. And all his disciples are exactly the same. From Carthage. And this is all the Romans left of Carthage. And a little boy that I photographed in southern Tunisia. And somebody said I look like this brother from Tunisia. You'll be the judge. And Aksum in Ethiopia. And the great church of St. George at Lalibela. And you can see it from the side. The local people say this was built by angels. And funny looking little angels to me. Look at the wings and those big eyes. This is in Gondar, Ethiopia. Sister Yah took some wonderful photographs from Gondar. She was a pleasure to travel with. She's one of our great educators and one of our great activists. And just a joy to be around. With a very mischievous sense of humor, I might add, too. No, I wasn't going to let that go. This is from Great Zimbabwe. My point is just to show that civilization in Africa was continent-wide. The ruins of Great Zimbabwe. And Mansa Musa in Mali. And his predecessor, Boubacar II, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. And there I am with the Niger manuscripts, similar to the Timbuktu manuscripts, ancient African writings. And from Nigeria, and Nzinga from Angola. And this is the mast of a ship that I found in the French Museum. Let me finish up by taking you very quickly to a view of Africans around the world before slavery days. This is Antar the Lion, the father of chivalry, a dashing knight and poet in the Arabian world, and the first known illustration I have of the people called Jews. And here I am with a black Palestinian, and from ancient Iran, and a sister from Yemen, and India. Of course, I've spent a lot of time with black folk in India, so I'll go through these very quickly. There are more black people in India than any one country in the world, and it seems like I've met most of them. This was the blackest person I'd ever seen in my life. I stared at this brother for a solid 15 minutes, and he was staring at me too. Now, I don't know what he was thinking about, but I'm saying, damn, that brother's black. And these are all black folk from India. James Brown. She looks like she could be from Somalia or Ethiopia. The Untouchables. You can see the body language, how beaten down they are. Nepal, with a great black leader from India, with a brother from Bangladesh. Ancient China, Africans from several historic dynasties in China. Bodhidharma, the man who brought martial arts to the Far East. From ancient Japan, a patron of the samurai. Southeast Asia, Cambodia. Look at the faces of ancient Cambodia. A whole mountain with these faces. From Vietnam. All from Vietnam. This is just a photograph I took of the South China Sea, sunset on the South China Sea. These are all from Thailand. Look at these images of the Buddha. And just to compare, from the Philippines.
What?
And these sisters kind of resemble each other. From ancient Europe, the Venus of Willendorf. Compare. These are all from ancient Greece. I know I'm rushing, because I've overspent my time. This is from the Etruscan civilization. You can compare this with this. Oh, I got 15 minutes. All right. Should have never told me that. Look at this nappy hair. From ancient Italy. From the Etruscan civilization. An African-born emperor of Rome with bad taste in women. The Archbishop of Septimius Severus. The reconstruction of another skull of a sister who lived in York, England 1600 years ago. She's called the Ivory Bangle Lady because in her tomb, ivory bangles were found. She was a wealthy black woman of North African origins who lived in York, England. Your knight in shining armor. This is St. Maurice. And there he is again. And again, St. Maurice in heaven. This is from Germany 500 years ago. And this one I found in Latvia. About as far north as you can get, 500 years. Look at the brother, the saint, surrounded by two blackamoors. And this is the patron of Coburg, Germany. I hooked up with a brother who had been in the military in Germany. And he said, Dr. Rashidi, you must go to the town of Coburg in Bavaria. And in this town, you have all of these images of Moors. And this is the patron saint in Germany, in a place where you hardly find black people. A black saint and a white saint. An African king, looks like Bernie Mac in European Christian mythology. Look! This is before the transatlantic slave trade. That changed everything. And then the black Madonnas. This is my favorite one from Switzerland. Look at how muscular little Jesus is, like he's been going to the gym. In Prague in the Czech Republic. In Halle, Belgium. This is interesting because the black Madonna is actually breastfeeding the child. Now, because they are black, they are all thought to be able to perform miracles. The miracle attributed to this one is that she stopped an invading army. Supposedly, she caught 33 cannonballs in the lap of her skirt. I didn't believe it. You probably don't believe it, but just for the hell of it, I took pictures of the cannonballs anyway.
Oh.
Here I am, I think, looking cool in the center of Australia with the most spiritual people I've ever encountered, the Indigenous Australians. This is a bust of Truganini and her husband. Truganini is the last full-blood Tasmanian. And when I went to Tasmania, I found this place. It's a place called Oyster Cove, which is where the last full-blood Tasmanians were kept. And it says, as you can see, our future generations will save our nation, black history. Their colors are red, gold, and black. Black for the people, gold for the sun, and red for the land because they say the land is covered with their blood. In Fiji, with a chief who I told looked like John Henry Clark. Now I'm sure he'd never heard of John Henry Clark, but he seemed to be really flattered. And these sisters and brothers say they come from Africa. And he said, where do you come from? Now I could have said Babylon, I could have said the U.S., but I was feeling it. I said, I come from Africa too. And he said, well, have you been there? I said, yeah. He said, well, come tell us. We want to know. What's it like?
Wow.
Come live in my village. I'll find you a wife. You can teach history. We'll just leave that one. In Bougainville, Papua New Guinea. These are the people of Melanesia. 50 Cent. And you have these natural blondes in East New Britain. In Bougainville. And this sister who I really fell in love with in about 5 minutes. It don't take long for me. Why did I fall in love with this woman? Because I ended up somehow on a tour bus with a bunch of rednecks. If they were around today, they'd be having Make America Great caps on, right? And I'm looking at them with contempt, and they're looking at me with the same contempt. So we go to this village in Fiji, and this is where the Fijians say they first landed when they came from Africa. And they're proud of it. So this sister looked at this group and looked at these rednecks and says, you know, we come from Africa. And we speak an African language, even now. And we used to eat a lot of white people. But the meat was so bad, it made us throw up and vomit, and we had to stop. I knew that was the woman for me. She was married. John Henry Clark said we didn't eat enough white people. More natural blonde. Each one of these has a story. I could give a lecture on each one of these photographs. Look at this child mugging for the camera over here, and this mean-looking little boy. And there he is again in the corner. I want to say, like, do you need a hug or something? But I was afraid. These are the people called the Buka. Buka means black skin. And from Vanuatu, these people helped me out when the hurricane hit over there. And here I am on Buka Island at the airport. These brothers just saw another African, knew I wasn't from there, wanted to take a picture. They shut the airport down. This is the security personnel. If you see a picture of me like this at JFK, I'm going to jail. Fortunately, that wasn't the case. Benny Wenda, a friend of mine who will be the president of West Papua if it ever becomes independent, who looks so much like LeBron James. East New Britain, Palau, King of Hawaii, King of Hawaii. Finally, let me finish with these images from America before Columbus. With one of the massive Olmec heads. There are 20 of these. I've seen every one and photographed every one. Look at all of these. Look. This is the first one that was identified. This is the one with braids in the back. There you can see the braids. And there's El Negro again, my friend. Look at these images from ancient Mexico. And this is not taught in the schools of Mexico any more than it's taught in the schools here. Almost done. All from pre-Columbian Mexico. Look, you can see for yourself. And the children just have low self-esteem. They don't know any of this. So it's my job to teach them.
That's right.
Classic Mayan, Peru, Canada, and then the slave trade. This is the Tree of Forgetfulness. This is a plaque of these Africans marching around this tree in Benin as they marched to the slave ships. They were supposed to forget everything in their lives and prepare themselves for the life of a slave. Sometimes remarkable things happen. I'm especially big with the children. Here's, for example, a picture I've been circulating on my Facebook page for years, or for a long time anyway. So one night, on a Saturday evening, I'm doing a lecture at Marcus Garvey's Library in London, bless you, and there the little baby is. Her mother comes up to me and says, Dr. Rashidi, you know you've been posting pictures of my daughter on Facebook? And there she is. And sometimes great things happen. Here I am with the Oni of Ife, a governor of Nigeria. Next to me is the former president of Nigeria, and I was the first keynote speaker at the Global Black Nationalities Conference in Nigeria. And this is one of my favorite photographs, and next to two of Africa's greatest scholars, Theophile Obenga and Ibn Cham, and I'm sitting in the chair of the president of Senegal, who just went to the airport to meet Gaddafi and says, Renoko, you come sit in my chair, you be the president for a day. I said, sure, I'm happy to do it. With Muta Baruka and Julius Garvey waiting for the president of the Gambia. And these young brothers that I lectured to, this is how I ended up doing this presentation at Purdue University. For some reason, on this cold, snowy night, only these young brothers, these science students came. They were all engineering students. And we just talked about what it meant to be black men. And here, this is what I say, how do you plan for today and tomorrow if you don't know what happened yesterday? And this one I like, we so black. Instead of buying your children all the things you never had, you should teach them all the things you were never taught. Material wears out, but now it stays. If we're fighting each other, we can't fight the enemy. We must learn to forgive each other and to believe in each other again and to trust each other again and love each other again. I know it's not easy. We've been so badly damaged, but we have to start somewhere. Otherwise, we'll be victims forever. The black man must love, honor, and respect the black woman. Renoka Rashid said that. You can quote it. Black love is beautiful. Black is beautiful. Being black and powerful will be even better. Let's work for that. And finally, our history did not begin in chains, will not end in chains. And I think this is absolutely the last one. And this is what it all boils down. These are the lessons from what I've been trying to convey. This is it. Our ancestors paid a tremendous price for us to be able to speak out against injustice. We don't have the right to be silent. You can't look the other way. You can't pretend that it just happens to somebody else. We have to get involved. We have to be organized. You think Donald Trump give a damn that you mad? He's probably happy. Anger is not enough. Outrage and indignation is not enough. We have to get organized. We have to spend money with each other. We have to stay up late at night. And it can't be, it was too cold. It was too far. I didn't want to spend the money. I didn't like some of the people that I knew were going to be there. How are we going to liberate ourselves with small thinking like that?
Yes.
So sisters and brothers, we have a great legacy. As Baba James talked about, we have walked a great and mighty walk, and we got a long way to go. But with knowledge of self, with the knowledge that we have done great things, you know what we are capable of doing. King Simon is about that. And I'm so happy that through Dr. Angela, King Simon reached out to me and asked me to come to Brooklyn and be a part of this program. I had never heard of King Simon. People come to me all the time, Renoka, can you do this, can you do that? Most of the time it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. But sometimes people come through and they restore your faith. They make you believe. You all have made me believe. The way you lined up to get those calendars, with your patience trying to get this program organized, with the technician and Brother Samuel who helped put me in the corner so I could show the pictures. And King Simon, we're grateful to you.
Thank you, brother.
And we need each other. God bless you all. Thank you very much. You know I'm comfortable because I took my shoes off.
And we know what it is. Stand up for the Baba. Come on, he's gonna come out to the front. Turn on the lights for me. Turn on the lights, real quick. Yeah, until well, you know, you can sit there and table because we just gonna do one live performance and then we just gonna get. But give him a round of applause. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. Man, oh yeah, we gotta keep these elders coming, man. Come on, gotta give it to them again. Give it up to them again. And Bible Smalls also give it to them again. All of them, and I just spoke to Dr. Jeffries, is on his way, because that's good. We're gonna do a live performance right now, then we're gonna take a break, and then Baba Jeffries will be here. We got to play till 9:30. We here. So don't go nowhere, sit down. We got a live performance by another conscious artist. Before y'all go out and take a break, and then before y'all run.
Asante, and thank you very much, brothers and sisters. Let me express my extreme pleasure in being here and acknowledge and ask permission of the elders to begin to speak. Do I have your permission? Thank you. I'm grateful to the United Africa movement, Brother Maddox, Brother Clemson Brown, Sarah Russell, Brother Ben, and everybody I've had a chance to interact with so far, Sister Beverly and Sister Kabira, who have my books and tapes in the back, and all of you for coming out tonight. This is my first time being here, and hopefully it's just the first of many, many, many times. I just got back, and also let me acknowledge my own elder, Brother Bill Jones. Brother Bill and Sister Kefa Nephthys, his wife, his queen, have been like a mother and father to me for the last 5 years or so. We are very, very, very close, and it gives me a lot of pleasure just to be in his presence. one of the things that, two things in particular, can everybody hear me pretty well? Right? I just got back from Egypt a couple of days ago. Yeah. And my fourth time there in the last 5 years. I hope to go back every year. And so I'm a little bit more subdued than usual. But two things I like, and plus, Brother Maddox is a hard act to follow. Yeah, very, very impressive brother. I had mentioned to Brother Ben coming over here that I needed about 20 minutes to prepare for my presentation. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to do that." In fact, we told Brother Maddox in the room, he says, by the time he finishes, you'll be lucky if you have 20 minutes left to do the presentation. But I have more than enough time. I'm pleased to be here. And just for me, would you acknowledge Brother Alton Maddox personally for all the work that he's been doing? Now, as for my man Bill Jones, I learn a lot from Bill. We talk several times a week about everything. And it's good to have an elder like that, because all too often we lack that. But the two things that Bill has taught me more than anything else, one is that our liberation, the liberation of African people, will come from African people. And it will come from the African community. It will not come from a suburb. It will not come from a college campus. It will be made up by the people who will liberate themselves. That's number one. Very important lesson. And number two, there have been times in my life, and probably others too, where we let our success go to our head. And success is a relative thing. Being in the limelight, having all that attention, and getting all that acknowledgement, such as I just received. Well, we were discussing that one day, and I was pointing out, Bill, this makes me feel very important, makes me feel very special. And Bill says, man, it shouldn't make you feel important, and it shouldn't make you feel special. What it should make you is responsible. Okay? That's some very profound stuff, and absolutely on the mark. So, Brother Bill, I'm glad to be here. Now, tonight, I want to introduce a couple subjects, but the main body of what I'm going to talk about is black folks not just in Asia, but specifically in India. The reason that is important is because India has the largest concentration of black people in any one country on earth. And as far as from an African-centered perspective is concerned, it is relatively unexplored. There's a Latin poet who is probably black, because so many people in the Roman world were African, and his name is Ovid. And he wrote a book called Metamorphosis, and there's one thing in particular in that book I've really been vibing on lately, and that is an expression that he used, and that is, he delighted to wander in unknown lands. He delighted to wander in unknown lands. And that statement has really been moving me lately, because there are black people in parts of the world of which we have hardly no idea. Two of the areas that I've been most interested in is Australia, where you have black folks who have been there now, would appear 120,000 years. That's a long, long time. And off the southeast coast of Australia is an island that everybody has heard about, but we really don't know a whole lot about it. And that island is called Tasmania. And you know about Tasmania? What you know about Tasmania? You know about all the black people that were wiped out there? I was on the way over here, and Brother Ben, I said, I saw some Hasidic Jews, and I said, there are a lot of Jews around here. And he says, this is Jew York, Renoko. And because of that, we all know about this term Holocaust. It's as though they have a monopoly on the term. But there have been Holocausts all over the world. And most of them have affected black people, African people. Now, Tasmania had such a Holocaust, and this is the last Tasmanian right here. Can you see this sister right here? That's a cold photograph, ain't it? Her name is Truganini. And in 1803, Tasmania, following Southeast Australia, was established as a British prison colony. And by 1876, every one of these black people had been murdered, every one. They were shot to death for use as dog food. Infants were roasted alive in fires. Crackers in Australia used to play a game, and this is what they used to do. They used to take a black family, and they would cut off the man's head, the father. They would decapitate him. And then they would take the widow, and they would repeatedly rape her. And sometimes they would cut off the man's head and attach it on a string and tie it around her neck. And then of the surviving children, they would bury them in the sand up to their necks and take turns kicking off the heads of the babies. These are not pleasant things. Not all of our history is pretty, but these are things that we must know. History is very important. It tells you who you are, tells you what you are, tells you who your enemies are, what you can do, and what you must do. So this article, which I'm very proud of, because as far as I know, it's the first article of its type written from an African perspective. There are a few of these available on the table, along with a series of videotapes on Australia, on India. There's one on African women in antiquity. Can't say enough about black women. You know that. Past and present. There's a general one called African Contributions to the World. And there's another one which you really ought to like called Are White People Inherently Evil? And I'll let you fill in the blanks on that, right? Maybe by the end of the presentation we'll take a poll, we'll take a survey, but I get the impression that it's already been decided. And last but not least, I do have some copies of my new book on the African presence in Asia, and most of the information I'm going to be talking about will come from this book. Now, it used to kind of embarrass me to do those things, to talk about that, but it don't embarrass me at all anymore. Because this is what I do. I live and breathe this, and the income from these things go right back into the research. What I'm going to do tonight is largely show you a slide presentation. Those slides cost money. We have to be able to pay for these things. We need all the things it takes to build a nation, and nobody's going to do that for us. I don't work for white folks. I don't live around white folks. My wife is black. You know, I don't have any white friends. Okay? I can see this is my kind of audience, okay? How come I ain't been here before to the United African Movement? We're going to have to make up for lost time, because I love to run my mouth, right? I love to talk about African people. You're talking about getting a thrill and a rush. All I did in Kemet last week was to lecture. One time I got so excited, I was on a cruise ship near Kanambo, lecturing to about 80 black people. I got so pumped up, I thought I was going to levitate for a minute. I thought I was just going to literally get up in the air and fly around. History is one thing that can do that. History is one thing that can excite us. And we need to be excited perhaps more than any other time in our history. So everybody with me so far? Okay, before we really get into it, we're going to turn the lights down, and I'll begin the slides because I want to do a show and tell thing. I was fortunate enough to meet him a few times. Not a whole lot, but I met him a few times and we talked on the phone, and I'm honored to have had that opportunity. One of the greatest things that has happened to me in my life, since I've been in the struggle, about 25 years now, is to meet some of these elders, some scholars, some activists, and you got to be both. Kwame Nkrumah said that thought without practice is empty and action without thought is blind. That you can't just be an intellectual and you can't just be an activist all by itself, but somehow you have to combine those. Dr. Scobie just joined the Ancestors, about 3 weeks ago? And he did some serious work. And I hope that the rest of us, when we do go, because we're all getting out of here at some point in time. In fact, I was in the Valley of the Kings, probably my favorite part of Egypt. And in all the tombs, and on the papyri, you have all these judgment scenes. And you see the god Ampu or Anubis taking the deceased by the hand and leading before Asar or Osiris, the great judge, with the 42 other judges behind him. And you know the scene where you have the scale, and you have the heart on one side of the scale, and an ostrich feather. It's interesting that you should have an ostrich feather because the ostrich is an animal indigenous to Africa. And people be talking about, was Egypt African? Okay, what a foolish question. And you have the ostrich feather on the other side. And the bottom line is you will be judged by your deeds. Now that man can be judged by his deeds. And one of the greatest pleasures I've had is having an opportunity to interact with people like Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Bill Jones, Chancellor Williams, John Jackson, Charles Cofer, and a host of others, okay, that give us inspiration. It is said to speak the names of one's ancestors is to make them live again. So we speak Dr. Scobie's name and acknowledge his work tonight. I wanted to begin with that. Also, I just wanted to mention a couple other things as I get into the main. Can everybody see so far? Right. I heard somebody saying something about the podium, but again, I'm so pumped up, I didn't know what you were talking about. Finally, brother said, move the doggone podium out the way. Now, everybody knows that this is King Zoser. And this is a piece that's in the Cairo Museum. It's one of the nicest pieces. Now, I did the tour in the Cairo Museum myself. Usually you have to have a tour guide. And they wanted to go right to, the tour guide wanted to go right to King Tut. And I said, no, man, we got to start at the beginning. And this is one of my very favorite pieces right here. This is King Zoser of Dynasty 3. And of course, Imhotep worked under him. Imhotep, the great multi-genius. And that's the man who designed the Step Pyramid. Now, the reason I'm starting with this is I just wanted to point out something. Now, you see how dark this piece is. It looks almost like those are his flesh tones. Right? And in the back, what you do not see in the picture, and I've never seen it in a book, are these big, thick braids. Beautiful piece of art. That piece is now white. I've never seen anything like it. It has been bleached white. Now, I don't know what they did to it, but I didn't even recognize the piece. And so that's the kind of thing that's going on right before our eyes. This is another very powerful king right here, and this king is Amenhotep III. Now also when you're in the Cairo Museum, and if you ever go to Kemet, you got to go there, because that's worth a trip right by. So how many people have been to Kemet? Okay, good number of people. Everybody needs to go. Every African should set foot in the Nile Valley at one point in time in your lives. People talk about if you're Muslim, you take the Hajj, you take the pilgrimage to Mecca. But that is the Holy Land as far as I'm concerned. That, the Nile Valley, is the Holy Land. But so many of these pieces, something's going on. Now this piece is still in the museum, but the tour guides will take you right past it. But there's, and you can see how African it is, the big thick dreadlocks. This is King Namare Amenhotep III. He reigned for 48 years. That's my favorite king in Egyptian history. But there's another piece, far more Africoid than that has been in the museum for years. Ashel Kwesi pointed it out to me for the first time a few years ago, and now that piece is entirely gone. It's a big empty space right there. I find that those Arabs who have no more place in Africa than any cracker in South Africa are as racist as any peckerwood that ever lived anywhere, anytime on this planet, okay? Also, you find so many Japanese over there that seem to think they're honorary crackers, right? So I just got back from Kemet, and I just wanted to point that out. Now, I was talking about Tasmania, and I just want to show a couple other slides. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. This is a black man from Tasmania. We do not know what the black people called that country. The name Tasmania comes from a white man named David Abel Jansen Tasman, who landed there in either 1642 or 1652. Now, the black folks there had been in this island for 35,000 years, and probably for 10,000 years they were physically isolated. And as I say, in the 1800s, white people began to use it as a prison settlement for their own convicts. Now, this is a brother named Wu Reddy, and he's a tribal leader, a tribal chief. And I want you to take a good look at this and then compare it to the next 2 or 3 slides I will show you before I get into the main body of the presentation. Now, look, what a remarkable contrast. Now, these are the last Tasmanians, and this is a place called Oyster Cove. They were brought to Oyster Cove around 1852, and they were brought there to die. This is the last male Tasmanian. His name is William Laney. He died at the age of 34. And this is Truganini, who I just showed you the photograph of. She's the last Tasmanian peer. She died in 1876. Now that's a chilling thought, the entire destruction of a people. But brothers and sisters, we are confronted with that right now, right here in America. Okay? When you look at crack, when you look at AIDS, when you look at all the things that surround us, the fact that there are more black men in prison than are in college, we are confronted by that same tendency. So I wanted to start with that. Now, the bulk of our presentation tonight focuses on the African presence or the black presence in India. A fascinating place because, again, it is a part of the world where we seldom recognize an African presence, but black people have been everywhere. In order to understand the history of black folks around the world, including India, three things need to be looked at. Everybody with me, still with me so far? Mm-hmm. Now, in order to understand the history of black folks in any part of the world, three phases need to be looked at. Number one, you need to be able to see, as I know you do, black folks as the first people on the planet. That all modern humanity comes out of Africa, whether you like it or not. Now, you got some humanity we don't want to claim. But, they can trace their roots back to Africa, too. And those black folks, when they spread all over the world, they went into Asia, they went into Europe, they went in America, they went in Australia. First people in the Western Hemisphere were black people. And then you have black folks who came and they introduced what we call civilization all over the world. Everywhere. Everywhere, no exceptions. In China, the first dynasty is called the Shang dynasty. The people that came after the Shang described them as having black and oily skin. In Japan, you have the traditions of the first samurai and the first shoguns being black. You have black people in places like Korea and Vietnam. The first people to go into Europe are black people. In Scotland in the 10th century, you had a black king who reigned over 3 provinces. You have black Vikings. You have blacks who introduced the Olmec civilization, and as well as Africa. And then you have black folks who got caught up in the slave experience. Now, the word slave comes from Slav, as in Yugoslavia. And let me just reemphasize, too, what you already know, that slaves didn't come from Africa. Africans came from Africa, and they came over here against their will. They were farmers and merchants and blacksmiths and scientists and astronomers and mothers and fathers and sons and daughters. And they were taken out of Africa involuntarily and brought to the Western Hemisphere where they were enslaved. That same process starts in India. India, the first people were black, the first civilizers were black, and later on, black people were introduced over there as slaves. And the majority of black people in India today are called untouchables. Now, I know black people catch hell all over the world, brothers and sisters. We catch hell right here in Brooklyn. I catch hell every day in Los Angeles. I just left Egypt, and black folks catch hell over there. I just mentioned Australia and Tasmania. Black people shot to death for use as dog food. In the 19th century, it was not uncommon for black people to be stalked to get their bones in Australia to be used for scientific research, but nowhere in India does the condition of our people parallel that of nowhere in the world does the condition of our people parallel that of India. And that is what I want to explore tonight, those 3 areas. In fact, let's just look at the geography a little bit. Now, this is where we want to start. Came over here. This is the Himalaya Mountains, or the Himalayas. This is where the first civilization in India began. It began along the banks of this river. That's the Indus River. Civilizations begin along the banks of rivers because rivers facilitate transportation, irrigation, and communication. The first place it starts is the Nile Valley, and it spreads to the rest of the world. This is the Ganges River. The Ganges River, according to most accounts, is a name given to it by an Ethiopian general who led an army out of Africa in antiquity and conquered as far as this area and left his name. I didn't used to believe that. Jay Rogers pointed that out, and I said, well, maybe this is where Rogers made a mistake. But Rogers didn't make many mistakes. He was a meticulous detective. About 10 years ago, Van Sertima sent me a photograph of King Ganges that he got in Trinidad. Most of the black folks today are in South Central India and South India, and they are called Dravidians or Tamils. And last but not least, you have black folks in this island right here, Sri Lanka, in the northernmost part, of people called Tamils who are fighting for their independence. The major liberation group is called the Tamil Tigers. They are the baddest, the most ferocious group of liberation fighters I've ever studied in my life. When these brothers, one of them blew up Rajiv Gandhi a few years ago, a sister, walked up to him with a bomb under her skirt, blew him away. They still looking for Gandhi, right? And I hope they never find him, right? You have these brothers and sisters here when they go, and I'm going to talk about Gandhi tonight too. You have these brothers and sisters over here, when they go into battle, they have a string around their neck with cyanide capsules on each side. They don't intend to be captured in battle. I would like to see us develop some of that ferociousness over here. And some of us have it. The problem is, we're killing other black folks. So that's a little bit about the geography. Now this is from, ancient India, the Indus Valley that I just showed you. Now from about 2300 BC to about 1500 BC, black people had it going on. They had an area larger in size than Kemet. The mother goddess reigned supreme. Women were very powerful. And anytime you see an ancient society where women are very prominent, you know there were black folks there. Anytime you have a society where women played a prominent role, there were some sisters over there. That is our tradition. You have a highly developed technology. They invented the windmill. They domesticated cotton. They domesticated the chicken. You figure must have been some black folks over there too, right? They invented the game of dice. They had a game similar to chess. They had flushing toilets. They had hot and cold running water systems. They had multiple storied houses, and this is what they look like. And this is a classic example right here of the people of ancient India. Now, how many folks have seen this photograph right here? A handful? You would recognize it automatically as a sister, wouldn't you? Not really? Everything about that photograph says sister. Everything. And it's funny. It's only about 7 inches high, but you have the posture, the facial characteristics, the fact that it's black stone. It's a very nice piece. This right here is also an important piece. This is a figure that is identified as a black buffalo. And what it shows, it's about 4,000 years old, is a man in a yogi position, a yogi posture, a meditation posture that we are later to identify with Buddhism. This is an example of the writing system that black people developed in that part of the world. Here's an early depiction of black people from northern India. This is on the cover of my book, The African Presence in Early Asia. It's a 400-page book with all the information, all the photographs I'm going to talk about tonight. I do hope you get a chance to get one. I only brought a few copies. There are a few copies left, and I'd be happy to autograph it for you. Now, this is of a famous scene, an epic in Indian history called the Mahabharata. And this is the great African god Krishna. The name Krishna means black, and these are the major heroes in the story. Look at the hairstyles. This is of the god Krishna right here. Sometimes he's called the Indian Hercules. He is a prototype of Jesus Christ. He is one of what Percy Graves and John G. Jackson call one of the world's 16 crucified saviors before Jesus Christ. He is born of a virgin birth. He is born of an immaculate conception. He is killed at the age of 33. Jesus is a shepherd. Krishna is a cowherd. Even the name Krishna and Christ sound remarkably similar, and yet Krishna lives 1,500 years before the supposedly historical Christ. And Krishna is always identified as black. The name Krishna means black. This is supposedly a depiction of Krishna holding up the burden of mountain of the world. We seem to always be holding up somebody's burden, everybody but ours. Maybe one day we'll hold up ours. This is a depiction of an African god from West India This is 800 BC. This is of a dynasty called the Kushan dynasty. Kush. The Kushan dynasty, this is 300 BC. This is in northwest India. Now, this crown reminds me of many of the pieces that you will see in Egypt. And also notice, like a lot of Egyptian pieces, the nose is gone. And probably for a lot of the same reasons. You know why. And this is a sister from that same area. A temple complex. This is very much like the temples in Gondar, Ethiopia. These are carved out of the solid rock. You can get an idea as to the size of them by the people right here. They started carving down into the mountain. And all of these things that I'm showing you will be a part of a tour that I'm trying to sponsor that will take place in 1997. I went to India for the first time in 1987, and people still talk about it. I spoke at a historic conference there of Black Untouchables, and people talk about it today. My goal for 1997 is to bring 20 to 40 conscious African people to India to meet Black people over there, so that you will not only get a chance to see the antiquity, but you will get a chance to see what I'm going to show you in a minute, and that is Black people over there today. That's something that's never happened before. Even Marcus Garvey did not achieve that. And I want you to be a part of that. So there are some brochures available, and I'd like you to get access to them. This is another temple complex. This is just the beginning. What I really want to show you are Black people in India right now. But this is the beginning. This is the temple complex in South India. And now, brothers and sisters, let me just give you an idea about when I talk about the African presence in India. I use the word Black and African interchangeably. Let me show you what I'm talking about. And these are Black folks from India and the adjacent islands of Sri Lanka and the Andaman Islands. This is a sister from a place called the Andaman Islands off the east coast of India. Now, these brothers and sisters have almost been wiped out now. If they were in Africa, they would be called pygmies, or Batwa, or Mutwa. Little bitty Black folks. This sister looks evil right here, doesn't she? And I guess she has good reason to, because they have been subjected to they're very similar to the Tasmanians, except a few of them survive today. And that's a major problem right there. I see all I got to do is talk bad about white folks and everybody gets excited, huh? And just to kind of compare, these are Black people from East India. And I just slipped this photograph in, and these are Black people from the Philippines today. See, all of these are areas that we really haven't looked at. What is the African presence globally? Now, you know that Black people in America have a direct connection to Africa, because most of us come over here as a result of the last phase. Black people in North, South, Central America, the Caribbean, we come directly from the continent. Black people from Europe. But Black people in Australia with straight hair, red hair, blonde hair sometimes have been there 120,000 years. Black people in Melanesia have been there 50,000 years. Black people in India and the Philippines have been there maybe 100,000 years ago. Their story has not been examined from an African. What is our relationship to them? What is their relationship to us? How do they view us? Basically, we're operating out of a veil of ignorance, and that's the worst thing in the world. Our ancestors in Kemet used to say, ignorance is evil. In America, they tell you ignorance is bliss. I'm happy to be ignorant. Don't come to me with that. I ain't hearing that. I don't want to hear it. Because brothers and sisters, as Brother Bill pointed out to me, with knowledge comes responsibility. Once you know something, you have to decide what you're going to do with it. So most of us would prefer not to know. Am I right or wrong in that regard? Now, this brother represents the third phase of Black folks coming over there, and this is Malik Ambar. Now, he was born in Gondar, Ethiopia, and he was taken out of Africa about 1575 AD. He was brought to India as a slave. He was very intelligent. He was a Muslim, and many of the people, black people who converted to Islam in India, were able to gain their freedom, and they became known as the Siddis and Habshis, Siddis and Habshis. And they became the primary soldiers of the Mughal Empire. The Mughals were, you might say, the cousins to the Mongols. And the Siddis were the baddest, most ferocious, awe-inspiring soldiers in that period in Indian history. What they would do was guard the ships of Muslims going to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. And it is said if just one of these Siddis was aboard the ship, no pirate would come anywhere close to that ship. They could field up to 50,000 of these black men in battle. And they were the dominant military force in Western India until the 19th century. Malik Ambar became a king in the West Indian state of Gujarat. He sent an African ambassador to the court of Persia. He built a post office. He built a mosque. He put poets and scholars and historians on pension. He patronized learning. He built all of his monuments and he built all of his statues out of black stone. Strong racial consciousness. His name is Malik Ambar. Now, let's look at your brothers and sisters in India today and see if you recognize anybody. This is the sister who was on the cover of my brochure. There's a much bigger picture of her in the book. And these are black folks from South India. These are people called Dravidians. The Dravidians were the builders of Indian civilization. And they had that civilization in effect until about 1000 BC. I told you about all the wonderful things they had in their civilization. Hot and cold running water, trash chutes, multiple-storied houses. And then white people came. And then the white man came. And combined with earthquakes and overpopulations, those crackers were the final factors in destroying that civilization. But and these white folks were wild and nomadic. They had never seen a city, knew nothing of settled life, but they were attracted to the wealth of black folks in northern India. And over a period of about 1,000 years, in spite of fierce resistance, they ran those black folks over. And they developed a social order that they called Varna. And the word Varna means color. And this is the way it went. You have 4 components of this system, which we call the caste system. And caste determines everything: where you eat, where you sleep, your occupation, who you marry, everything. And you are born into a caste. Can't do nothing about it. Now, this is the way it developed, and this is the oldest European document on earth. And this is called the Rig Veda. And the term Veda is a Sanskrit word that supposedly means knowledge, and there are 4 Vedas, of which the Rig is the most important. Y'all still with me? I want you to hear what I'm going to tell you now, because this is very important. This is white supremacy over there. I used to think that racism came as a result of the slave trade, of the need of Europeans to justify the inhumane treatment of black folks. But you find that wherever white people and black people have come in contact with each other in history, I don't care where it is. It could be Iceland. It could be Antarctica. I haven't found any exceptions. White people have been aggressive. They've come to kill us. And that practice still is with us today. You can study white folks 5,000 years ago and find basically the same characteristics that you find in 1996. History is very important. Ain't nothing new. Now, what they did, they write this book, and they say that there are 4 parts of God's body. And the first part was called the Brahmins. They call God Brahma. And from Brahma's mouth issued the first part, and that part was called the Brahmins. And they were supposed to be the poets and priests in society. They formed an aristocracy, kind of an elite. And they were all identified with a different color. Now, the Brahmins were identified with the color white. And then next in the anatomy is a group called the Kshatriyas. They're identified with the color red, and they came forth from the shoulders of God. And they were the military aristocracy. And beneath them is a group called the Vaishya, who came forth from the thighs of God. And they were identified with the color yellow. And they were supposed to be the farmers and merchants. And beneath them were the Shudras, Shudras, who supposedly came from the feet of God. And they were to work for all the other castes, all the other groups. They were identified with the color black. And beneath them is a group called the outcasts or the untouchables. And that means that the touch of these black people was considered contaminating or polluting to all the other members of the society. Their very touch. Sometimes the sound of their voices. Sometimes their shadows. Sometimes their very sight. So that they were not allowed to interact with the overall white community. This is going on in India today. Some parts of India today, most parts of India today, black people cannot use umbrellas, wear new clothes, ride bicycles, brothers and sisters, or even to hold up their heads while walking down the street. Until the 1920s, in major portions of India, for example, you have a major city called Pune. These untouchables, most of whom are black, could not enter the city between the hours of 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. because it was thought that because of the position of the sun, their shadows would be too long and the sun would cause a shadow to reflect on their body and pollute other people. When they walked down the street, they had to attach a broom to their back to erase any evidence of their presence, and they had to attach a cup around their neck to capture any spittle that might escape their lips and contaminate the ground. They were not allowed to listen to the recitation of any sacred text. If they were caught, their ears would be filled with molten lead and tin. This is in Indian law books, Brother Maddox, in Indian law books. If you struck a member of another caste, in other words, if a black person struck a white person, your arm would be cut off or your leg would be cut off. If you had sex with a member of another caste, you'd be castrated. You could not own any property except the property that belonged to the dead. And much of this still goes on in India today. Now, this beautiful black woman right here is an untouchable, and she's from South India. Now, this brother is a Brahmin. You do have some black folks, some Uncle Thomases, who have managed somehow, that's what I heard about Clarence Thomas, they call him Uncle Thomas. They don't use the word Uncle Tom anymore because I recently found out that Uncle Tom was a revolutionary brother. Uncle Tom worked for the Underground Railroad. So, we need to examine everything. Can't take these cast-off terms. Even in terms of the slave experience, which I don't deal with too much anymore, that needs to be re-examined. You know that black folks, for example, in 1859 in Florida, under the name of the Seminoles, black people, Native Americans, had 2/3 of the United States Army and Navy employed in Florida fighting these black people. There were more than 250 major slave insurrections. Do you know it was a black woman named Mary Ellen Pleasant who financed John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry? Gave John Brown $30,000 in 1859. Now, 30 grand is a lot of money even today. I'd love to have 30 grand stacked away, right? In 1859, it was a huge amount of money, and yet that's an untold story. Now, so you do have some black people that managed to worm their way into the aristocracy. A reason a lot of us also don't recognize these folks as black is because of the straight hair. But you have black folks with naturally straight hair all over the world. You have black folks, I found them in Nubia, without any racial intermingling. Another thing about India is a racist society even today. David Duke, the white supremacist from Louisiana, said he got his major concepts about race when he went to India. Now, this is a beautiful photograph right here. This is what you call a tribal person. These people have the status of untouchables, but they have maintained their tribal identity. The bangles denote wealth. Look at this sister right there. Now, you couldn't hardly tell her from a person from Central Africa. These black folks look particularly like the Maasai in Kenya, don't they? Now this looks just like my biological sister in Los Angeles. Right? And these are black people from South Central India. What is it about South Central that seems to draw us like a magnet wherever we are? People ask me that about Los Angeles all the time. This is Satya Sai Baba. Some people consider him a sage and a holy man. Others consider him a punk and a sellout. So I guess it depends on your perspective. Now this is a marriage couple right here, a bride and a groom. They don't look too happy. You should see me and my wife. We look very happy. I tell you, when you meet the right sister, there's nothing like it. Now look, this, all the features are there. The only major difference, the only comparison, the only contrast is the hair texture. Why are you so quiet out there? Just taking it in, huh? That's the good thing about a slide presentation. It makes it very easy. These images don't lie. And one of the things I want to do is build up a vast, vast slide collection. We need to have teachers with access to these sorts of things, right? And again, that's one of the reasons I do appreciate Brother Malik, because I'm totally self-employed. And this is what I do. This is my life's commitment. So coming here, being able to sell a few books and generate some income, it allows me to develop this kind of background. So when I'm up here doing these presentations, believe me, I realize this is a collective effort. I'm just a spokesperson, but this is something that requires the input of all of us. All of us have a contribution to make here. And if we don't do that collectively, we're not going to make it as a people. Yeah. Now, this looks very much like a brother you would see in Australia, doesn't it? Remember, you have 160 million untouchables in India alone. You have more untouchables in India than the combined populations of England, France, Belgium, and Spain. The condition of these black folks today is terrible, even particularly the condition of untouchable women. If you're black and you're a woman, and you're an untouchable, that means you have a life of misery from the very beginning. And you cannot get out of your caste. Born into it, that's it. It is believed in Hindu thought, and caste is the basis of Hinduism, the one religion where social inequality is written into it. Now, all of them practice social inequality. But Hinduism is the one where it is written into it that people are born unequal. It is believed that people are born untouchable because of karma and rebirth and sins accumulated in previous lifetimes. I can't go for that. Now, within the last 30 years, you've had a group of black folks who call themselves Dalit, D-A-L-I-T, and these are very angry, so-called militant black people. They take their inspiration from organizations like the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panthers. They've always been taught not to fight back, to be docile, because the key in Hinduism is this. You're born an untouchable, and that means you're catching hell. But if you accept your status meekly, then you will be born on a higher level in the next life. Here we're told, be a good African, and you'll go to heaven. Don't worry about somebody with their foot in your rectum right now. You're going to be born, in the cities of, you know what I'm saying. You're going to heaven, everything's going to be cool. Well, they taught something similar to that. Be humble. Be passive. Be meek. And by and by, everything will be cool. By and by. Now, that's my favorite one right there. What's the biggest street that black people frequent in Brooklyn? What's the street black people deal with here? Fulton Avenue? This is the person you would see on Fulton Avenue? No, I see him on my street all the time. I live near Crenshaw in Los Angeles. Looks like some people right here in the room today. And these people are very interested in us. They want to identify with us. Sometimes I think we are not aware of the impact that we have on black people around the world and the responsibility that goes with that. Now, this is a tribal person, and again, these people have been beaten down. These people were made untouchables because they are the ones who fought the hardest when white people came into the country. They never surrendered. And as a result of that, when they were finally defeated, they were made examples of. And they remain untouchables even to this day. One of the reasons I believe that this is the most cold-blooded form of oppression in the world, too, is because it has been going on for so long. When the slave master has been truly successful, it is when he has been able to convince the slave that slavery is his natural state of affairs. He's done a good job with us over here. Because I believe, maybe I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, that the masses of our people have come to accept oppression. They've come to accept white supremacy as if that's normal. And when you come to them with something else, they look at you, are you crazy? And somebody said when the master freed the slaves, some of them never left the plantation because they were comfortable with it. Well, in India, it's even worse. All over India, I would ask people, I said, do you really believe these things, that you are born filth and feces? And it seems you could see the look in their eyes, yes. Where the indoctrination has been so severe that the cracker don't have to worry anymore. Yes, sir, brother. And I just wanted to show you this. Now, I pointed out that black people developed the first, I'm just going to take about 5 more minutes, and then y'all have to invite me back. This right here, I pointed out that black people developed the first civilization in India. And this is what we've been reduced to in India today. And these are tribal people, but I'm very proud of them because they've managed to maintain their integrity and their belief systems in spite of everything. The people I'm most proud about in the Western Hemisphere are the Maroons. You know, the Maroons, like those black folks who set up the Republic of Palmares in Brazil, were black people who never accepted slavery, no matter what they had to endure. Also, Hinduism, I pointed out, is a racist religion. It's a color-coded system. And so you have a reaction to it, and that is on the part of Buddhism. Now, the Indians believe, the Untouchables believe, that the Buddha was a tribal leader who advocated resistance. And they take great pride in that. And you will see that the earliest depictions of the Buddha do, in fact, show him to be a black man, such as this one right here. But even black folks have somehow inserted their own gods into the Hindu pantheon. For example, this is a god named Shiva from South India. Perhaps what's so cold about it, though, Dr. Lynn Jeffries, is that who I see over there? I thought you were supposed to be in Los Angeles, brother. How you doing? All right. Dr. J. That even, this is the bad part about it now, even in the parts of India where black people dominate, they still practice untouchability, even amongst themselves. The reason the system has not been broken is because even the untouchables have a hierarchy, so that some are less touchable than others. That's how the system remains intact, because the cracker has been able to divide us to the point where we fight each other and see ourselves as the enemy instead of looking at the real enemy. Brothers and sisters, we need a whole new reorientation. That's why these forums are essential. That's why you need to be proud of yourself for organizing these programs. And of course, this is a CD or sadhu, very spiritual. Some of us become so spiritual that we lose touch with reality. I ain't got no use for that kind of spirituality. The only kind of spirituality I'm really interested in is something that is rooted towards destroying white supremacy and restoring black people to their rightful place in the world. That's what I'm for. If you're a Buddhist, if you're a Muslim, if you're a Christian, As long as you for Africa, I'm for you. We can work together, okay? I ain't none of those things. I consider myself an African spiritualist, whatever that is. But all of it has to go towards the uplift of African people, right? Now, I wrote an afterword to a book called Dalit, the Black Untouchables of India, written by a colleague of mine in India named, I'm just going to take a few more minutes, named V.T. Rashekar. And the cover of the book says, if you knew the condition of black people in India, you too would be in tears. This is a tribal woman whose husband has just been murdered by a group of caste Hindus. And the real culprit, according to most of the black folks in India, the one individual they can point to, the Adolf Hitler of black people in South India, is this, well, these are some atrocities. Let me show you this man. Is this fellow right here. Who knows who that is? Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Notice I didn't call him Mahatma. The name Mahatma means great soul, and he is anything but that. I could call him a lot of things, but certain words are not appropriate in certain audiences. Gandhi was born in India. He went to England. He became a barrister. He became a lawyer. And then he went not back to India. He went to South Africa. And while he was in South Africa, he became a virulent racist. Very anti-black. He referred to black people as niggers and Kafirs. But not only that, let's talk about the myth of the Mahatma. First of all, he was not a man of nonviolence. In fact, here he is in a South African military uniform. He fought actively against black people on 2 occasions. He fought with the Boers against the Zulus to seize possession of the land. Gandhi's struggle in South Africa was to see to it that Indians were not reduced to the same status as black people. Now, you didn't know that, did you? I wonder if Martin Luther King knew that. History is critical, brothers and sisters. Malcolm X used to say, of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. He didn't say it was the only thing, but he said it was a vital thing. Some people think that what we're trying to do is get lost in the past, to go back to ancient Egypt. You couldn't do that even if you wanted to. We're talking about what lessons we can learn from it, even recent history. There's your boy, Mohandas Gandhi. Now, I know I got friends of mine in India, at the mere mention of the name Gandhi, get angry. You can see them clench their teeth. I got a buddy named Velu Anamale. One time, Velu and I were just talking, and I made the mistake of using the word Mahatma. I thought our whole relationship was going to end. Right? They consider him the greatest enemy of black people in the history of Asia. That's their word. They say they would kill him if he were alive today. Gandhi is like Columbus. He has had these myths grow up around him. But when we begin to take away that myth and see who this man really is, we look at him with contempt and disgust. And he becomes public enemy number 1. There he is with a whole group of Indians, again, that were employed by the British, by the crackers in South Africa to dispossess black people there. Now, this is the major leader of the Untouchables, or Dalit. His name is B.R. Ambedkar. He's from central India. He came at a time when the British were in control of India, and he was able to go to the United States and receive an education. He was inspired, like Marcus Mosiah Garvey, he read Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery. Very inspired by it. He went to Columbia University. He was actually in New York for a brief period at the same time Marcus Garvey was here. They may have met. And he came back to the he came back to India, and he was the most educated man in all of India, even though he was an untouchable. They decided to make an example out of him, and Uncle Thomas out of him. And so what happened was, they put him in the government, and they put him in the law department. And he found out that the law clerks wouldn't touch his legal briefs. And that when he got ready to leave the office at night, they would take a rag and wipe the doorknob off and remove the carpet so he wouldn't walk on it. So Ambedkar said, hey, I see how it is. No matter how brilliant I may be, I'm still an untouchable. And he dedicated himself to fighting for the uplift of his people. So for them, He is the Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Louis Farrakhan, Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, you name it, all roll into one. His name is B.R. Ambedkar. And to show you the progress black folks are making there, same thing we got to do over here is realize we have to do it ourselves. You cannot expect the same people to put shackles and chains on your hands and your feet to liberate you. How we developed that idea, I don't know. Here's a group of folks who went to Africa to hunt you down and get you, take you over here like sardines in the most brutal manner possible. I've never been to West Africa yet, although Lynn Jeffries keeps telling me and John Henry Clark I gotta go, because I'm gonna go crazy in one of those slave fortresses, right? Some of us, all right, I'm going one day, brother, but I gotta prepare myself mentally, right? These brothers and sisters over there have developed what they call the Dalit Panthers, and they name it directly after the Black Panther Party. They take their inspiration from us, and this is the office of the Dalit Panthers in Bombay, India. Now, I'm going back to India in 1997, and I want some of you to go back with me. Again, the brochures are over there, the books and tapes are over there. You ought to get a hold of one. And last but not least, this is the last slide I want to show. That's Dr. Chancellor James Williams. And I wanted to show Dr. Williams because he is probably the single most influential person in my life in terms of pushing me in the direction of India. And at some point in time, I decided, it was pushed on me, Renoko, specifically, what are you going to do? What area of research are you going to focus on? And I read Chancellor Williams' book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, and that is what I decided that I wanted to do. Brothers and sisters, it's kind of late, and I know I've covered a lot of ground. Brother Maddox covered a lot of ground too, but there's a lot to cover. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. It has been said that history is like a light that illuminates the past and a key that unlocks the door to the future. In a limited amount of time, I hope tonight we've been able to shed some of that light on what we must do and help open up the key, or take that key and insert it in the lock and open up the key to the future. I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to the dialogue the next time. Hotep. All right, brother. Thank you, man. All right.
Brother Renoko Rashidi. Brother Renoko Rashidi.
I've been asked to speak. My name is Renoko Rashidi, and I've been asked to speak on a variety of issues related to the African presence in Asia, Australia, and the islands of the Pacific, and I'm delighted to do that. Now, first things first, we should begin to talk about the origin of humanity in Africa and the dispersal of African people into Asia, Australia, again, the islands of the Pacific. Now, we know that the earliest form of humanity began, as far as we know, in Central Africa, somewhere in this area of Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia. In fact, from this whole region, from Ethiopia down into Southern Africa, for the last 25 years or so, we've been saying that the earliest form of humanity is Australopithecus afarensis. And this is a term which means great southern ape from afar. And this area, afar, embraces, as I understand it, western Ethiopia. In 1974, a team of paleontologists led by Africans as well as Europeans, specifically the team was headed by a man named Dr. Donald Johansen, a European American, located and identified the bones of an African woman, subsequently known as Dinkanesh to Africans. This is a term which means you are wonderful, and Europeans called her Lucy. Now, these bones were found actually by an African, but of course it was the European American who got the credit for the find. These bones again were found in western Ethiopia, excuse me, in the Afar region, A-F-A-R, and they were, I think, through the use of potassium argon dating techniques, found to be about 3.4 million years old. And for virtually the last quarter century, they were identified as our earliest archaic or proto-human remains. Now, I was in Australia, and I'll talk about that some in a moment, last year, in November and December of 1998, and while I was there, another set of bones, slightly older, were found in South Africa. Now, Denkanesh represents the remains of an African woman. The bones found in South Africa represent the remains of an African man. And these are the oldest, relatively complete proto-human fossils that have yet been identified. Denkanesh, about 3.4 million years old, and the bones in South Africa, about 3.5 million years old. And these were both of the species of man called Australopithecus. Again, that term means Great Southern Ape. And that term came into being, I believe, in the early part of the 20th century because most of the early fossil finds were identified in Zimbabwe and South Africa. So therefore, Great Southern Ape. Now, this is again about 3.5 million years ago, and then following that, about 2 million years ago, you have the another ancient ancestor called Homo habilis. And this term means handyman. And all this evolutionary process is occurring only in Africa. You have to begin in Africa for the origins of virtually everything ancient. So Homo habilis is important. Homo habilis distinguished himself from the Australopithecines because he stands upright, he has a large brain, but the major difference is in advance in technology. He's able to effectively manipulate the environment. He makes tools, and this is a very important distinction. Homo habilis is eventually followed by Homo erectus, and that simply means erect man. And the earliest, as far as I know, remains of Homo erectus have been found in Kenya. A lot of them are intimately identified with the Leakey family, Louis Leakey, Mary Leakey, and eventually Richard Leakey. Homo erectus is very important and is an advance from Homo habilis, or handyman, because by this time we have lost most of our body hair. And as a result of that, because of the environment we lived in, you have very dark skin or dark pigment, you're heavily melanated, and you have tightly curled hair. Today, these characteristics would be identified as typically African. Homo erectus is also important because for the first time in human history, we might say, humanity is able to migrate over large distances, over long distances. We, again, make tools. We have domesticated fire. Homo erectus is important, among other reasons, because of the domestication of fire, a very basic human technology. In fact, until about 20 years ago, it was taught that fire was domesticated in China about 500,000 years ago. But within the last 20 to 25 years, it's been found that fire was in fact domesticated in East Africa about 1.5 million years ago. So because of the domestication of fire, because humanity had learned, for example, how to take an ostrich shell, put a hole in it, pour the contents out, or use the contents, and then put water in it, like an ancient kind of canteen. And so humanity is able to travel long distance. We've lost most of our body hair, we have a dark pigment, we have tightly curled hair, and so for the first time, humanity is able to engage in intercontinental travel. So that in China, you have what is commonly known, or was known for a long time, as Peking man, now called Beijing man, and in Indochina or Indonesia, in the island of Java, you have what is called Java man. These were regional variations of those early Africoid populations known as Homo erectus. Finally, Homo erectus is followed by Homo sapiens. So in Europe, Homo sapiens is identified by the term Neanderthal man. And again, this represents another advanced stage of humanity. And finally, through the use of DNA studies, particularly mitochondrial DNA, we have the advent of Homo sapiens sapiens, wise man, or modern man. And we know these studies began at least by 1985, 1986. You have a fellow at Oxford University named Dr. James Wainscoat, and then at the University of California at Berkeley, Dr. Alan Wilson, and at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where I taught briefly, you have a woman named Dr. Rebecca Khan. You have similar studies going on at the University of Nigeria at Ibadan. These studies show that based on DNA, specifically mitochondrial DNA, which can only be traced through the genes of women, that all modern human beings have an African ancestor. That modern humanity, not just archaic humanity, not just the Australopithecines, not just the early hominids, but modern humanity itself begins in Africa and begins to disperse itself all over the rest of the world. And this is where we get the so-called variations in the human race. Now, I contend that there's only one race, and that's the human race, which originated in Africa. All of us, like it or not, have an African ancestor. And the problem that many of us have with that is the way we have been taught to view Africa in a vastly negative light. So therefore, many people reject the African origins of modern humanity out of hand, simply because of racial prejudice and bias. But these studies again indicate conclusively that modern humanity began in Africa, dispersed to the rest of the world. For example, as a sidelight, African humanity goes into Europe, and we are affected by Ice Age conditions, and we are forced to adapt physically to those Ice Age conditions. And we know that this happened. For example, the sun for thousands of years would almost literally go out, and we'd be forced to live in the caves of Europe, losing much of our melanin pigment, our melanin content. We would, our noses would probably grow longer and thinner so that they're not breathing in the cold Arctic air that would freeze our lungs. The hair on our body would grow different, almost covering us like a mat because of the extreme cold. And so these things lead to the variations, I believe, in the human race. And of course, Dr. Charles Finch and Sheikh Anta Diop, among others, have done a very good job with that. Now, speaking of Asia, you probably have a similar phenomenon that takes place here. In northern China, for example, you have another adaptation to physical environment, and this leads to what is commonly called the epicanthic fold over the eye. Diop, for example, postulated that because of the way the wind blows in the areas of Mongolia and northern China, that we would have a physical adaptation so that the sand or what have you is not blowing directly in our faces. Diop also postulated that it was a group of ancient Africans interbreeding with a group of people coming out of Europe that led to the Mongol or Mongolian in the first place. The epicanthic fold is called, in its more crude form, slanted eyes. But these are terms that are outmoded, that are racist, and we try to avoid that. Now, I always contend that to understand the role of African people in world history, there are three phases that must be looked at. Number one, that humanity began in Africa. Number two, the role that African people have played in the development of classical civilizations, and we will look at that in Asia. And number three, the enslavement process. Now, before we deal with the latter two phases, let's continue with the first and point out the remains of those original African or certainly Africoid populations in Asia. For example, or not just Asia, but Australian islands of the Pacific as well. For example, again, based on my recent travels, and I've been blessed to travel virtually all over the world in the last 2 years or so, in Australia, I was able to interview many brothers and sisters. And I would make these points about humanity beginning in Africa based on studies of DNA. And they would listen politely and not say a word. And then later that night, in a more social atmosphere, they would come to me and say, Brother Runoko, we like you. And we find what you're saying to be very interesting. However, we don't agree with it. We believe that humanity began in Australia, that African people didn't come from Africa, that African people came from Australia, that we believe Australia is the center of the universe, and that this whole area here was a gigantic landmass that connected Australia with Africa. and that African people came from here and ultimately migrated into Africa. In fact, as a side note, it might be interesting to say from their perspective that they believe that all humanity has an ancient Australian ancestry. They say, for example, that we have all the features common to humanity, that we have straight hair, and the Europeans and Asians have straight hair, that we have black skin, and that African people and Pacific Islanders have black skin. So therefore, it's logical for them to assume that humanity began in Australia. The people I'm talking about are traditionally known as Australian Aborigines. And this is a term which many of them find offensive. They don't mind being called Aboriginal, but the word Aborigine to them is kind of like the word Negro is for us. It has a negative connotation. They say that they have lived in Australia for 120,000 years. In fact, many of them told me that they believe that they were in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, and that Adam and Eve got kicked out and they didn't. They see themselves as the custodians of the land. They refer to earth as mother, and they have a very close connection with the earth, with mother. Of course, today they have been terribly abused, terribly oppressed. They refer to themselves oftentimes as black fellas, and they have their own indigenous names. For example, in the north here, they refer to themselves as Benning people. I think that's spelled B-E-N-N-I-N-G. And then in this area in Queensland, they're called Kooris, K-O-O-R-I. South of Queensland and New South Wales, they refer to themselves as Muri, M-U-R-R-I. In other parts of the country, they are known as Noongar, etc. The black people of Australia, the original inhabitants of that land, today have been terribly oppressed. And perhaps we're getting ahead of the story, I'm not sure, but we know the Europeans came there in large numbers, British or English convicts mostly, in the late 18th century. Today, black people in Australia are only 1.6% of the total population. And yet in many parts of Australia, perhaps the whole of Australia, black people make up 70% of black men make up 70% of the prison population. Black women, 50% of the prison population. In many Aboriginal communities, the unemployment statistics range into the percentages of 90 to 100%. Imagine that. 90 to 100% of the people totally employed, which means they're totally at the mercy of Europeans. They are not allowed to live off the land in the traditional Aboriginal manner, and they are totally on the dole. Until 1967, black people in Australia were not considered human beings, they were not counted in the national census. They were like sheep and cattle. In fact, they were identified as flora and fauna. They were used for nuclear experiments. Nuclear devices were detonated on Aboriginal land to see the effect that it would have on human beings. And these are the brothers and sisters that I was among for 3 weeks. The average life expectancy for black men in Australia is 45 years.
You said they were used as dog food. One thing, that whole island at one point was black.
Yes.
And at what point did Europeans come in? How many blacks were there, and over what period, and how were they destroyed?
Mm-hmm. Europeans began to come into Australia, to my knowledge, around the same time they went into South Africa, about 1650. Now, up till that point, Australia had been relatively isolated. We do think, in fact it seems certain, that there were incursions or, I don't think the word invasion is the proper term, but there were relationships, perhaps not the best, with China in Australia. But certainly Europeans began to establish themselves beginning no later than the 17th century. Now, by the major, Australia is established, certainly what came to be called New South Wales, Australia, is established as a prison settlement beginning in January 1788. And at this time you have, I think, 4 shiploads of white people, English, who sail into what became known as Botany Bay in Sydney. And these are convicts for the most part. You have some administrators, you have some soldiers to keep the convicts in line, and you have missionaries. And at that time, it was estimated that you have an Aboriginal population of anywhere from 1 to 3 million people. Within a short time, by the middle of the 19th century, in fact, that population had been reduced to about 50,000 people. And they were truly wretched. You have, among other things, black people who are the victims of mass poisonings. You had the heavy use of arsenic and strychnine. And Europeans would mix it up with flour and knead it into a dough, add a little water, and you would leave it out with the hope or the belief that, from the perspective of white people, that Aboriginal people would eat this food. It was common for black men to be castrated, mass rape of Aboriginal women, black people being herded to the top of cliffs and being forced to jump off, being forced into the ocean and not allowed to get out, being forced to stay in the ocean until they drowned. Mass cremation of the bones of black people. Now, early in the history of the whites, what might be called white settlement in Australia, a group of seven white men were hanged for a mass killing of black people. And one of the few times that this happened, and as a result of that, there came to be kind of a pact among these white convicts and their descendants that they could kill black people, but the key was not to let people know about it. There was a pact of silence. Black people might spear a sheep or a cow, or they might attack a white man who was encroaching upon their land and raping their women, because there was black resistance. We've always resisted. And as a result of that, there would be reprisals on the part of white settlers, all out of proportion. If a white man were killed, white settlers, and they had, the advantage they had was the massive firepower. They would go out on a reprisal raid, and they might kill 500 Aboriginal people, might wipe out an entire community, an entire tribe. So it's difficult to say how many black folks there were originally. Estimates range from 1 million to 3 million people. Today, they're only 1.6% of the population. Perhaps the closest analogy we can make is that of Native Americans or Amerindians and their relationship with white people here. It's very, very close. And the situation today is very, very sad. Although there is kind of a spark, there's an essence among Aboriginal people that I haven't found anywhere else in the world. So that's a bit about the Aboriginal people who survived in Australia. Of course, I believe, and most other scholars believe, that humanity did originate in Africa, and over a period of time either came over by land bridge or in all likelihood walked out of Africa into Asia over a period of tens of thousands of years, and ultimately ended up in this area of Indonesia and then sailed from these islands into Australia. This would have made the black people in Australia, the so-called Aboriginal people, the first sailors or the first navigators on this planet. You also have other Aboriginal populations in the islands of the Pacific, sometimes called Melanesia. These are the South Pacific Islands. And these brothers and sisters in areas like New Guinea, Solomon Islands, New Britain, New Ireland, and what have you, Fiji, Vanuatu, have probably been here for 50 to 60 or 70,000 years. Now, they look much more like black folk in Africa today because the dark skin and also the texture of the hair. Black folk in Australia tend to have straight to wavy hair. Black people in the Pacific Islands, at least in the South Pacific, we can talk a bit perhaps of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. Melanesia means the Black Islands. Polynesia is many islands, and Micronesia, I guess, small islands. So you have black people, Melanesians, who look very much like folks from Africa in this area, and there may be 10 million of them today, and they are largely the remains of those ancient African migrations from the beginning of modern humanity. And then you have an island to the southeast of Australia, and that island is of course known as Tasmania. Most of us have heard of Tasmania from the United States and other parts of the world because of this cartoon character, the Tasmanian devil. There is a Tasmanian devil. He is a marsupial, very much like a wolverine. And you might say there's a two-legged devil in Tasmania too. Now, the reason I bring up Tasmania after Australia and after Melanesia is because you have black people here who are closely related to the black people of Australia, but they too have tightly curled hair, woolly hair, peppercorn hair, sparrow hair. And all of the full-blooded black folk in Tasmania were wiped out, every last one. The last one is a sister named Truganini, who died in 1876. Not only were these brothers and sisters killed in Tasmania as well as Australia, but they were not even allowed to rest in peace. For example, Truganini, and I'll have to send you a slide of Truganini, the day she died, her body was taken out of the coffin and strung up with piano wire in the Tasmanian Museum, where it remained on display until 1947. Finally, in 1976, 100 years after her death, her body was cremated and her ashes scattered at sea. Now, these brothers and sisters, if anything, had an even harsher fate than the black people of Australia. They were roasted alive, women sold into sexual slavery. I'll tell you one story, and this was confirmed to me in Australia, and this will sum up Australia and the suffering of our brothers and sisters there. There was a game that white convicts would oftentimes play. And I read this in a book, and I was told this by the indigenous people of Australia, that it was common for a group of white convicts in the bush or in the outback to capture a black family. And for sport, sometimes they would hunt them like animals. Sometimes, as I say, they would shoot them to death for use as dog food. But a game that they would play is to take an entire family. And they would take the man, the head of the family, and handcuff him in front of his wife and children and castrate him. And then he would run a few yards before he bled to death and died. And then he would be decapitated. His head would be cut off. And the head would be attached around his widow's neck. And she would be forced to parade around with the severed head of her husband around her neck. And then she'd be repeatedly raped by the convicts in front of the children. And then another form of torture, while she is forced to watch, they would bury all of the children up to their necks in the sand, in the soil, and then kick the heads off the babies one at a time. Sometimes they would play a game of polo with the heads of the children. Now these are the type of people that meted out massacre to Australian Aboriginal people. In fact, I just completed 2 books. One is called Blood on the Wadi, Massacres and Maltreatment of Aboriginal Australians since 1788. I mean, from the year Europeans, white folks, British landed in Australia, they began to massacre our people. Because of the massive firepower and ruthlessness, they were able to defeat our people in battle. And then another book is called Race Relations in Colonial Queensland. Queensland is in the north. It was referred by brothers and sisters in Queensland as KKK country, Ku Klux Klan country. And it's interesting that when the ANC came to power in South Africa, a lot of the white folks, the Afrikaners, the Boers in South Africa, relocated to Queensland. The book I'm reading, and because I'm working on a book on Australia, is called Race Relations in Colonial Queensland, a Policy of Exclusion, Exploitation, and Extermination. And these books are extremely painful, and it's very difficult to read them. But as painful as they are to read, as painful as they are to study, it is a story that must be told. And it's not nearly as painful for me to read it as it is as the pain meted out to the brothers and sisters there. And the massacres and maltreatment of Aboriginal people occurred all over Australia, and these massacres occurred well into the 1920s, and they have been effectively documented. So all the full-blooded black folk in Tasmania were wiped out. In Tasmania in 1803, it was established as another British prison settlement. And then again, you have black folks all over the Pacific Islands, including Melanesia. Now to the north is Micronesia, and I've had an opportunity to interact with black people in Micronesia, particularly on the island of Palau. And there are black folks that look just like Africans in the United States, so-called African Americans. And then to the west, of course, you have Polynesia. And I've had a chance to go to Hawaii several times. You have black people throughout the Hawaiian Islands. In fact, the people are so physically black that a group of American racists, white folks from the United States, went there in the 19th century, and they were so struck by the physical appearance of the Hawaiians that they came up with a song entitled, "You Might Call Them Hawaiians, but They Look Like Niggers to Me." They refer to the black children in Hawaii are referred to as pickaninnies, and they are physically black, physically Africoid, many of them black skin and straight hair. Diop says that the late great Dr. Sheikh Hans Diop from Senegal, that there were two well-defined black races. And we may not agree with that terminology today, but this is taken from his book, The African Origins of Civilization, Myth or Reality, originally published in France in 1954. So the terminology is probably a bit different then. He says there are two well-defined black races, one with black skin and woolly hair, the other with black skin and straight hair. Now let's return to Asia and look at some of those black people with straight hair. So the place we would have to look more than anywhere else is India. India has approximately, I would say today, easily 250 million black people. India has the largest concentration of black folk in any one country on the earth. And this will surprise many people. And of course, when I use the word black and I use the word African, I'm more or less using them interchangeably. These black folks are referred to as Munda in the northeast, sometimes Proto-Australoid, pre-Australoid, Proto-Australoid, and these are black people who look very much like Australian Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people in Australia not only have straight hair and black skin, but some of them actually even have blonde and red hair. And you have a similar phenomenon in India. Now, I had to go to India. I've had a chance to go there 3 times. I had to go to India and actually see this for myself. In the Northeast, for example, in March and April of 1998, I was in India in the state of Bihar. And I had an opportunity, a rare opportunity, one that I will never forget, to be among the tribal people. Tribal people in India are sometimes called Adivasis, A-D-I-V-A-S-I-S. That means original people or original man. And the government refers to them as scheduled tribes. So you have them in the Northeast, and I ran into brothers and sisters here, a group called the Munda, M-U-N-D-A, with black skins, extremely dark, but straight hair, and sometimes dark red hair. And then in the south, in the state of Kerala, among other tribal people, I've been really blessed, among other tribal people, and we'll have photographs of this, you have short black people, also with straight hair, and the women, at least some of the women that I met, have a kind of a platinum blonde hair. These represent the original populations of India, the people who came out of Africa and retreated into the forests and hills of India and maintained their original, what might be called Africoid phenotype. And we'll return to India in a moment when we deal with the civilization of the Dravidians. In Palestine or Israel, you have an ancient group of black people known as Natufians, N-A-T-U-F-I-A-N-S. And they are the ancient inhabitants of Palestine, the country that many people call Israel. In Yemen and Oman, you have ancient African people, black people, again, with straight hair, who find themselves in very menial positions. This is in the southern portion of the Arabian. You should also keep in mind that you have black folks with straight hair right up here in Nubia, in the northern Sudan and southern Egypt. So it's not unusual to find black people, even in Africa, with straight hair. The first population in China is black or African. In fact, you find their bones in southern China. And last but not least, perhaps when we're talking about ancient African populations, black folks who represent the earliest remnants of humanity in Asia, you have to talk about the people I refer to generally as the small blacks or the diminutive Africoids. In Africa, these people would be referred to as Twa or Batwa. In specific locales in Africa, for example, Cameroon, you have a group called the Baka. And these people are known by the pejorative term in Central Africa as pygmies. They are perhaps reminiscent of ancient populations. Maybe that's what the earliest populations looked like. I'm not sure if they were similar to the black folk in Australia, slightly larger bodily proportions with straight hair, but there were the real short black folk from Central Africa with tightly curled hair. I suspect that the little brothers, those diminutive Africoids, came first, and the people who might be called Afro or African Australoid came after them. And you find these populations all over Asia. For example, in the Andaman Islands, midway between India and Burma, you have a group of short-statured black people. In China, you have the historical recollections of a group called black dwarfs. In Taiwan, you have a group known as little black men who just became extinct about 150 years ago. You have in Japan a group referred to as little red man that supposedly was there before everybody else came, before even the group called the Ainu came. The Ainu, in fact, are supposed to have exterminated a race of people who lived in holes in the ground, short black people. So, and even in Southeast Asia, in places like northern Malaysia and southern Thailand. I'll be going to Thailand in about 2 months. I was there a few months ago, but I wasn't able to go to this part of it. You have short-statured or short-statured black populations. Perhaps even the Tasmanians themselves may be a fusion between the diminutive Africoids, pygmy-like blacks, and the larger black folks that we identify with Australia. Now that, I think, provides us with a pretty good overview of the most ancient populations in Asia, Australia, and the islands of the Pacific. Unquestionably African in origin, and I would say African even today. What needs to be looked at more is, I think, spiritual components and cultural components, specifically from an African perspective. I'm not aware of any African anthropologists or archaeologists who have done that kind of work. Perhaps through viewing this TV program, people will be inspired to do that, because the brothers and sisters in this part of the world, as we sum up, seem to be crying out to African populations, particularly African Americans, to come there and work with them. They told me over and over again that white anthropologists have come to Australia, have made money writing books, have gotten their PhDs from anthropological studies, and most of them are distortions of the truth. Now, having done that, let us now look at the role of African people in classical Asian civilizations. The first civilization in Asia, and when I talk about civilization, I'm talking about something essentially with 4 component parts. These parts being agricultural science, number 1, number 2, and this doesn't necessarily go in this order, but these are the 4 parts that I identify as a working definition of classical civilizations. Number 1, agricultural science. Number 2, urbanization. We have people living in cities, towns, and villages. Number 3, the use of advanced writing systems or scripts, whether it be called the Medu Neter or hieroglyphics, or in Western Asia, cuneiform. And number 4, metallurgy, the use of metal weapons and tools. Of course, when we find this initially, we find it in the Nile Valley in Africa. But civilization spreads. In fact, we might say that history is the movements of people. And the first civilization that I have identified, the oldest one, is based in the river valley of the Tigris-Euphrates, and that, of course, begins at the base of the Persian Gulf here, just north of Kuwait, and extends into the country that today is known as Iraq. This area has also been called many other things. It was called, I believe, by the Greeks, or perhaps by the Romans, Mesopotamia, which means the land between the 2 rivers, the rivers being the Tigris, Euphrates. This area is sometimes called Babylon or Babylonia. Sometimes it's referred to as Chaldea. But the earliest civilization that we know of began early in the 3rd millennium BC. That's about 5,000 years ago, and it's called Sumer, S-U-M-E-R. The Sumerians referred to themselves as the black-headed people. Their earliest and most exalted deity is known as Anu, A-N-U. This is a term that we find associated with thriving black populations at the dawn of history. Women seem to have played an important part. In fact, you have an early woman ruler in one of the city-states named Kubaba, who supposedly reigned for 100 years. That's spelled K-U-B-A-B-A. It's possible that you even have a matrilineal line of descent. That is to say, the line of descent in terms of rulership is traced through the female side of the family. You have people again referred to as the black-headed people. So all these things are indications that at least by the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC, that the governing elite of Mesopotamia of Iraq was composed of black folk. Next to Iraq, because each one of these could be a lecture or television show in and of itself, but I'll just give a brief overview. You have Iran. Before it was called Iran, it was known as Persia. And before it was called Persia, at least a section of it was known as Elam, E-L-A-M. This is a term, this is a nation that is even mentioned in the Bible, the book of Genesis. And these were clearly black folk with tightly curled hair. And one of the things that we can point to as evidence of that is the ancient art. I have been in France, I've been in Paris. I plan to go back in October just to spend a week or so in the museums of Paris. And you have a series of portraits of people called the immortals. The immortals were elements of the bodyguard of the Persian emperors and Persian shahs. They show black people. You have a man named Marcel de la Foix, a French archaeologist, because this area was dominated by the French, who did serious work on the subject in the 19th century. He came to the conclusion that the earliest descendants were black. You have other 19th century writers like Henry and George Rollins, and they all concluded they were African, they were black, and they were part of what might be called a Hamitic or Kushite or Ethiopian populations. According to the ancient Greeks and Romans, you have two Ethiopias. Ethiopia being a term which means the land of the burnt-faced people, the land of the black people. You have an Ethiopia in Africa that encompassed much of the Sudan and other parts of Africa. This is Western Ethiopia. And then you have an Eastern Ethiopia encompassing much of Western and Southern Asia. The only difference being was the texture of the hair. In Afghanistan, you have a place called the Hall of the Black-Skinned Warriors, where figures of Africoid warriors have been found. This takes us to Central Asia. In Turkey, you have an ancient African population. In fact, this is the place here called Colchis. This is where Jason and the Argonauts went to get the golden fleece. And even in Greek mythology, the Colchians are referred to as black. Among the greatest of them is a woman named Medea, a black woman who helped Jason steal, if we will, the golden fleece. You have in this area, somewhere between Turkey and Iran, the historical recollections of a black man named Memnon, M-E-M-N-O-N, who was one of the heroes in the Trojan War, described as black and handsome, the blackest man alive, or something to the effect that he was black as ebony and the most handsome man alive. You find icons of high black officials in Syria. You have depictions of black people known as Jews in Judea or Palestine. You have the black folks known as the Phoenicians and Canaanites in Syria, in Lebanon, and Jordan. You have black people in southern Arabia called the Sabaeans. The Sabaeans established the early civilization of Arabia. They were great seafarers. They exported frankincense and myrrh, which made them very wealthy. You have in Arabia itself a black man named Antar, or Antar the Lion, the father of chivalry, a knight, a dashing poet, a lover of women, and the story goes throughout all of Asia. Finally, in China, you have the Shang Dynasty, S-H-A-N-G. The people who founded the Shang Dynasty are described as having black and oily skin. The Shang Dynasty was established in 1766. It lasted till I think 1032 BC. And you have the archaeological remains. You have in Southeast Asia, again where I'll be going soon, in Cambodia. The first civilization in Southeast Asia is called the Kingdom of Funan, F-U-N-A-N. The builders of Funan are described as small and black. They are succeeded by the Kingdom of Chinla, and then they are finally succeeded by Angkor. And the icons of Angkor are all extremely Africoid. Broad lips, full nose, wide cheekbones. Same thing in Vietnam. The first kingdom in Vietnam is called the Kingdom of Kampa. It was located in central Vietnam. Black folk. And again, for documentation, the best documentation is the book, The African Presence in Early Asia, edited by Runoko Rashidi and Ivan Van Sertima. In Japan, you have the tradition that the first shogun, or military ruler, was a black man, Sakanoya Tomomoaro. And then you have two Japanese proverbs that indicate a black presence. One says, for a samurai to be brave, he must have a bit of black blood. The other version of the proverb reads, to make a good samurai, half the blood in one's veins must be black. The Philippines has an ancient black population. The only country that I have not been able to identify a black population in Asia is Korea. And I'm sure that it's just a matter of closer scrutiny. One has to be something of a detective to piece all of this together. Finally, let's go back to South Asia. And let's spend time now in Pakistan and India. And here you have, if not the earliest, certainly one of the greatest civilizations that was developed in South Asia, if not the world, and that is the Indus Valley civilization. Sometimes it is referred to as the Harappan civilization, and the reason we call it that is because right here along the river valley, the Indus River, is because one of the great ancient cities was known as Harappa, H-A-R-A-P-P-A. This is a civilization that developed about 5,000 years ago. It covered a larger area in size, all the way down here, up here, extending deep into India, probably including parts of Afghanistan and maybe even South Iran. It was larger in size than Egypt of the pharaohs and the civilization of the Sumerian blackheads put together. It is a civilization based on trade and agriculture. We don't know as much about it as we would like because the language of the script, the Indus Valley script, is yet to be effectively deciphered. However, almost everyone seems to believe that it was developed by a group of people called the Dravidians. D-R-A-V-I-D-I-A-N-S. And this civilization, or the Dravidians, are again black folk with straight to wavy hair. Very dark skin, straight to wavy hair. These brothers and sisters had a maritime trade that extended far into Southeast Asia and probably incorporated Somalia and southern Arabia. Some people believe that it was a group of Dravidians who even brought civilization to the Philippines. The Dravidians were such seafarers that they had a profound relationship with Rome. They even sent the Dravidian states of the south, even sent a congratulatory embassy to Augustus when he became Caesar at Rome. This was the basis of the Indus Valley civilization. Here, black folks domesticated cotton. They domesticated the chicken. They invented the windmill. They had a game similar to chess. They had a game similar to dice. They had a system, a hydraulic system, a sewage system, characterized by hot and cold running water, flushing toilet. Just remarkably advanced 5,000 years ago. Eventually, the Dravidians filter into northern India, and today they are concentrated largely in southern India. In fact, there are 4 Dravidian states, those states being Andhra Pradesh here. I've had a chance to visit each one of these states. Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. This is where the Dravidians eventually settled. Now, why would they settle there? They were driven there. And they were driven there by new groups of people. And this new group, specifically I'm referring to now, is called the Aryans, A-R-Y-A-N-S. These were white people, nomadic people who apparently come from somewhere in Central Asia, Eastern Europe. They domesticate the horse. They develop highly sophisticated stirrups and riding gear. They developed a compound bow, which was the most sophisticated missile weapon in antiquity. They developed light spoked wheel chariots. And beginning in the 2nd century BC, this Aryan storm swept out of this area, went into Iran, went into Iraq, and went into India. And wherever they went, they brought fire, sword, death, and destruction, rape, pillage, and murder. This is their legacy. In fact, even today, the term Aryan is a term that many people use to denote white supremacy. We know we have organizations in this country like the Aryan Brotherhood, the Aryan Nation, that are the epitome of the concept of white supremacy. In India, our case study right now, in fact, before we, again, just as to digress for a moment, you have a similar group of Indo-Europeans or Aryans who came into Iran known as the Kassites, K-A-S-S-I-T-E-S, and in Iraq these people are called the Mytani. I think that they were even among the Hyksos who invaded ancient Kemet. But in India, they began to filter into this area with fire and sword about 1500 BC. And they were able to conquer those ancient indigenous black populations of northern India. And over a period of time, they were, the areas that they conquered, they named after themselves Aryavarta, or the land of the Aryan.
Now, before this, that population had always been black. Can you just clarify that for us?
This population had historically been black. The Dravidians and the ancient Proto-Australoid or Munda populations. And at a certain point in time, we don't know when, you have Mongoloid type populations that filter in from this area and begin to intermingle with them. So in the far east of India, you also have a fusion. But this, in northern Asia, or northern India, these black folks were the victims of conquest. Indigenous black populations, dark skins, straight to wavy hair, again called Dravidians, and Munda, or Proto-Australoid types. Sometimes we even refer to them as ostriches. And again, beginning about 1500 BC, the Indo-Europeans, specifically known as Aryans, were able to begin a conquest of all of northern India. And this area is referred to as Aryavarta, or the land of the Aryans. And not only did they conquer the area, but they imposed a rigid, color-segmented, racially based social order called that the Portuguese would have called the caste system. And in ancient Sanskrit, the language introduced by these white folks, by the Aryans, this social order is called Varna, V-A-R-N-A, which literally means color. And it was based on race. Now the way it worked is that the whites would be on the top, the mixed races in the middle, and the masses of conquered black people on the bottom. Same thing happened in Australia in a more recent day. In fact, they imposed a social order with the whites on top, so-called mixed races. Here's the way it worked. Whites on top, Asians after them, mixed races underneath them, and finally the blacks on the very bottom. Same thing happened in India. And this is a very vicious social order. The masses of conquered black people are referred to as Sudras. And they are more or less slaves to the other groups. The topmost group is called Brahmins, and therefore the religious and social order is called Brahmanism. Some people refer to it as Hinduism, but the earliest name is Brahmanism. And then you have two other social groups, a group called the Kshatriyas and a group called the Vaishya. Now the Brahmins supposedly came from the mouth of the creator god Brahma. And they were the poets and the intellectual aristocracy, but more than anything, they were the priestly caste. And therefore, they were the most powerful group in the social order. They were the smallest group, in fact. And then beneath them is a group called, and they were identified with the color white. And then beneath them is a group called the Kshatriyas, identified with the color red, supposedly springing from the shoulders or biceps of Brahma. They were the soldiers and administrators. Beneath them is a group called the Vaishya, identified with the color yellow, who supposedly sprang from the thighs of God. And then, according to this account, and this is found in the earliest Hindu texts, including the Rig Veda, You have the Sudras, S-U-D-R-A-S, the masses of conquered black folk, and they were to be slaves to the upper three castes, or upper three social categories. And beneath all of them were the outcasts, commonly called untouchables. Today, these brothers and sisters, because most of them are black, are referred to as the Dalit, D-A-L-I-T. The term Dalit means crushed, broken, and oppressed. And these were even slaves of the slaves. These are the most oppressed people that I have found in human history. And they were punished because apparently they were the descendants of those black folks who resisted the Indo-European invasions with the most energy. And as a result of that, they were made examples of. They were told that their very touch, that sometimes their shadows, the sound of their voices, will cause pollution or contamination, particularly to the upper caste. They could not enter a Hindu village, a Hindu town in daylight. Sometimes they couldn't go at nighttime because it was thought that their mere shadows will cause pollution. When they approached another group, they would have to beat a drum or play a musical instrument just to let people know that they were there so they could scurry away. And sad to say, this system is still largely in effect in India today. It is the most brutal system of, the most brutal social system that I am aware of on earth, and it is originally based in race. Even today, there are more untouchables or outcasts. Sometimes they are referred to in the official language as scheduled caste. More Dalits in India than the combined populations of England, France, Belgium, and Spain. Most of them are black. They are overwhelmingly Africoid, and I've had a chance to be among them on 3 different occasions, once in the 80s and twice in the last 2 years. So in a nutshell, I think that that provides something of a summary of the first 2 waves of black people. You have black people as the first people in Asia, or Africans, if you will. You have Africans who are the primary innovators of classical Asian civilization, be it in China, Japan, India, Southeast Asia, the Arabian Peninsula, Turkey, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, Iraq, Iran, you name it, African people have been there and distinguished themselves, and this is very important. Now, the last and third wave is an involuntary migration, and that is those Africans who were enslaved. I always have to point out that slaves did not come from Africa, that African people were captured and enslaved, and there's a fundamental difference. I believe if you think, and these are in the words of Kwame Ture, one of our great ancestors, if you think your history begins with slavery, then you will come to the conclusion that the best you can hope to be is a good slave. He used to also say, in terms of the dispersal of African people, and he was a primary influence on me, in terms of where African people are located and how we call ourselves different names, he used to say that just because a cat has babies in an oven, you don't call the babies biscuits. And I think that that accurately summarizes our notion of identity and who we are and where we are. Now, in terms of the enslavement of the African people, this unfortunately has to be tied with the movement of the people called the Arabs. And the Arabs themselves, as I understand it, are largely a fusion between ancient African populations and Indo-European populations in Western Asia. Sheikh Anta Diop referred to this region in Western Asia as the zone of confluence. And here I'm talking about beginning from India, extending over into far West Asia. The zone of confluence is a zone of overlap and intermixture. Here's the southern cradle, or African cradle in Diop's words, and here you have the northern or European cradle, but in between is a zone of confluence where African and European or Indo-European intermingle, and this produced the Semitic world. And this is a critical phase, this is a critical world, because here you have elements of black and white. It's kind of like a racial, ethnic museum. Now the Arabs, as Muslims, began to take Africans out of Egypt, Sudan, modern Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and perhaps even Mozambique, take them out of this area, enslave them, and take them into Asia itself. You have the remains of those black people in the Arabian Peninsula, in Iraq, in Iran, in Pakistan, in India, and Sri Lanka. In fact, we even know the names of the black populations in Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka. In Pakistan, these brothers and sisters are known as Shidis. In India, they are called Siddis and Habshis, S-I-D-D-I-S, and Habshi is spelled H-A-B-S-H-I-S, and in Sri Lanka, they're known as Kafirs. And these black folk can trace their history over here at least by 1100 AD and probably much earlier. Many of them actually became Muslims, converted to Islam, and won their freedom and distinguished themselves. Before we deal with that, let us deal with a massive concentration of black folk, African people, in southern Iraq, Kuwait, and Iran. And these brothers and sisters here are known as the Zanj, Z-A-N-J. Now the Zanj were Africans, and the name can even be found in Zanzibar today, are Africans taken out of there and made to work in brutal, inhuman conditions in the salt marshes. In fact, what they did was extract saltpeter from these marshes, and they worked in extremely brutal conditions. As a result of that, they engaged in 3 massive uprisings, 3 massive insurrections in Iraq. The biggest one was simply called the Revolt of the Blacks. It lasted from 868 to 883. These black folks even built their own capital city called Moktara, I believe it's spelled M-O-K-T-A-R-A, which means the elect city. The revolt lasted for 15 years. It was never entirely suppressed. It spread even to Iran, and these brothers and sisters, I'm happy to say, even marched on Baghdad itself and threatened the entire caliphate. And then you have other black people, the Siddis and Habshis in India, led by a man named Malik Ambar in the state of Gujarat. Malik Ambar became something of a king in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. He had all of his statuary made of black stone. He sent an African ambassador to Persia. He established relationships with Siddis in other parts of India. He built a mosque, he built a canal, he built the post office. He put poets, scholars, historians on a kind of pension. He developed a sophisticated form of guerrilla warfare. Again, this is documented, all of this is well documented in the African presence in early Asia by Rashidi and Van Sertima. There's a whole chapter on Malik Ambar in a book called The African Presence in Asia by Dr. Joseph E. Harris at Howard University. The head of the Siddis was known as the Admiral of the Indian Ocean. They were given a stipend by the Mogul emperors of 300,000 rupees. They formed a kind of security guard on Muslim ships going to the holy cities from India into Mecca and Medina in Arabia. It was said by no less a scholar than Ibn Battuta that if you had only one of these Siddis aboard a ship and word got out, no pirate would dare molest that ship. These Africans had a reputation as being ferocious in battle, and they dominated the shipping lanes of the Indian Ocean until the British in the 18th century. So there, in a nutshell, covers, I think, the 3 major phases that I am aware of in history. Of course, you have black people going into Asia today directly from Africa, but historically, those 3 phases cover the major areas of the African presence in Asia. One, as the first Asians, the ancient populations of black people moving out of Africa into Asia, Australia, the islands of the Pacific. And then you have the role that African people played in the development of classical Asian civilizations. And finally, you have the enslavement process. The problem is, with much of our analysis, that most of us want to start with slavery and forget about or negate the first 2 phases, and therefore we have a problem. because you will come to the conclusion that your history in Asia, like many people believe, like our history in America, begins with enslavement. So perhaps if there are some specific questions that I haven't covered, I can do that now. But in a nutshell, I think that that summarizes the area. It has been said that history is like a watch that tells us the time of day. Dr. Clark used to say that. I would take it even a step further, that history is like a light that illuminates the past. It is a key that unlocks the door to the future. We need that light, we need that key. And this presentation is dedicated. Let me just make these last. It is said that history is a light that illuminates the past and a key that unlocks the door to the future. That's what I say. Now, this presentation has been dedicated to the lives of Dr. John Henry Clark and Dr. Kwame Ture, two people who influenced me. I'm a pan-Africanist and I believe in a global unity of African people. Are there any specific questions?
I just want you to clarify a few things. You pointed out that the oldest civilization, as you knew it, was in the area of Mesopotamia.
That's right.
Are you saying that Mesopotamia is older than the Nile Valley?
No. I'm glad you pointed that out. When I said, I meant to say the oldest civilization in Asia.
Okay.
Now, of course, a lot of people would argue us down and say that it's the oldest civilization in the world, and I think that's just based purely on racism. Because here you have a country clearly in Africa, although Egypt has been artificially removed from Africa and placed in a nebulous place called the Near East or the Middle East. But the people who began to do a lot of this work in the United States were members of the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago.
Correct.
And I think that they had an imperative to argue that civilization, of course, didn't begin in Egypt, although I don't even think they believed it. James Henry Breasted, the founder of the Oriental Institute, was an Egyptologist, and I'm sure that he believed that Egypt was the first civilization, or Kemet, the Nile Valley civilization, but certainly the oldest civilization in Asia that has been documented is the civilization of the Tigris-Euphrates, called different names at different times. Now, what I believe is that civilization spreads out of Africa and it moves east. We next find it, massive civilization in the river valleys. River valleys tend to facilitate civilization because rivers allow for the use of irrigation, transportation, and communication by their very nature. So I would say first you have the Nile Valley civilization, and then the Tigris-Euphrates civilization, and then perhaps the Indus Valley civilization, and finally civilization in the river valleys of ancient China. And then the Mekong River in Southeast Asia.
I think that was what you just did was important to kind of show the movement.
Yes.
If man is coming out of Africa, it would be only natural, almost impossible for it to have went any other way.
Of course.
Outside of the bring civilization as he moved. But if you could deal with that Aryan area up there for clarification in terms of a time period. You said that the Aryans, the Europeans or Caucasians coming out of the area, but at what point do they come out? How are they existing before? When are they more or less going from Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon to Homo sapiens sapien? And did they have cultures before then? Did they have civilizations? Are there any civilizations in Europe? How do they just automatically begin to appear and sift down?
Very good. Well, that deals more with Europe, and since we decided to focus mostly on Asia, Australia, and the islands of the Pacific, that's why I focused on that. But as you point out by the very nature of your question, it's almost impossible to separate it. It's all connected. Okay? In fact, I a lot of times don't even use the expression African history, but the African presence in world history.
Correct.
We are global people, and we are the primary movers in history. But I did mention earlier that you have a movement of African people into Europe, and we get caught up in the ice ages. I think the first human culture that can be identified in Europe is called the Grimaldis. Now this is based on the fact that I think a lot of the remains of this culture were found in Austria near a place called Grimaldi early in the 20th century. So you have the Grimaldis, and now almost nobody talks about them because it's clear they were black folk. You have the Grimaldis, and then you have Cro-Magnon. And I think Cro-Magnon can be traced anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 years ago. And even, it's quite possible that even the first Cro-Magnons were black folk too. But certainly when we look at Cro-Magnon, we mostly think about white people, and many people say that they're the prototype of the quote-unquote white race. So you have them. And then in historic times, you have the Indo-Europeans, who seem to have come out of this broad area here. And this is very important because this is sometimes called the steppe land. And this is, undulating grassy plains that is an ideal place for horse nomads. The horse is early domesticated up here, and these Indo-Europeans take full advantage of that. And this is one of the things that gives them an advantage, if not a superiority, in early warfare. Certainly these people were no more courageous, they had no more valor than African people, but they had the horse, which gave them great mobility in battle. And they also here, as I pointed out, developed a powerful, sophisticated compound bow and arrow, which gave them great advantages on the battlefield. And also the light spoked-wheel chariot, which made them virtually irresistible. And in antiquity, they went into ancient Greece and Rome. In Greece, they are called the Achaeans and the Dorians, killing machines. And then in Italy, they are known as Latins. They are the same people, I believe, that kind of be called Vikings in Scandinavia, the Celts in Western Europe. These are kind of Germanic people, and they spread from this area and they moved into Northern Europe, Western Europe, Southern Europe, and also Southern Asia. In Iran, they are known as Iranians. In Iraq, and also even before the Iranians, there's a group called the Kassites. In Iraq, they're known as the Mitanni. And you have similar groups all over here. And then in India, the most famous group in India and also Iran to some extent, they're called the Aryans. India, Pakistan, and Iran, they're called the Aryans. And they're driven into these areas by the wealth of these river valley civilizations. They are nomadic, they are patriarchal. You have a society where women have very little value. And again, over a period of more than 1,000 years, they are able to overcome the resistance of these indigenous black populations. This is one of the major turning points in history. You have a people who really are coming out of a savage state here, drawn to the cultures of these areas, and in many ways adopt a lot of the culture. So that today, one of the big themes in revisionist Indian history is to say that black people, the Davidians, didn't develop Indus Valley civilization after all, but it was those Indo-Europeans. And there's no evidence whatsoever to support that. Now you asked the question about did they have culture? All people have culture. All people have culture, but I make a distinction between culture and civilization. There is no civilization per se, but all people have human culture, no matter how rudimentary it might be.
Okay. I think you've been very excellent, unless there is something. Oh, in terms of language, I just want to for people, because we say that language began in Africa, and that Africa is the prototype of world language. Would you articulate on that?
I'm a historian, and I can talk about that. But in terms of linguistics, I really don't have much knowledge there. You would have to say that virtually everything originated in Africa because of the mere antiquity of African people. But I can't comment on that specifically. Probably language obviously began in Africa. But I would think language is something that all human beings develop. Sometimes people ask me, since I've been described as something of an authority on Asia, and that's a real broad thing to say, they ask me about martial arts. And I get questions like, well, what about martial arts? What about kung fu and karate and jiu-jitsu and all of that? Isn't it possible that it developed in Africa and spread? It is possible. But what I tend to think is that there's certain, you talked about culture, there's certain basic things fundamental to human culture. I think that all people develop martial arts. And I think that they could be indigenous to the areas. I think that culture is a process that comes as a result of adapting to your environment. And based on adaptation, you would have language, you would have martial arts, you would have, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So those are questions that I don't think there has been enough research done on. And I'm very careful about that. Now, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I first got started in this thing, I would have said that without question. In fact, in the book, again, The African Presence in Early Asia, which has gone through 3 editions, and obviously I'm very proud of, in the first 2 editions, there's an article that is on the African origin of Asian martial arts. And perhaps if I knew more about martial arts themselves, I would be more quick to claim it. But I think that if we make a statement like that, and it's not really well verified, and it turns out to be incorrect, then it tends to diminish the rest of our argument, and I refuse to do that. So I would say that the African origin of language and the spread to the rest of Asia and the rest of the world is very likely. The possibilities that martial arts in Asia and East Asia is originated in Africa or certainly influenced by Africa is very likely, but I can't say that with certainty. Now, some people believe that you have a man, I think, named Bodhidharma, who came from India and helped introduce martial arts into southern China, but again, that's not a field of my expertise.
Well, let me ask you this question as a closing question, and perhaps you can give a summary as we close out. I want to put kind of a timeline shot in the sense of looking at where civilization was, the longevity of civilization before you get the first encroachment of the Aryan of the invasions coming down and destroying those civilizations. How long had these civilizations exist? What time period are we talking about?
Okay.
That would have.
Now Valley civilization, we don't know how old it is. It may be 10,000 years old, it may be 20,000 years old. Some people are arguing that the Sphinx itself may be 25,000 years old. Same thing can be said perhaps in Iraq. The earliest evidence of civilization may be 5, 7, 8,000 years old. But the Sumerians dominated the Tigris-Euphrates, the lower Tigris-Euphrates, beginning from about 3000 BC to about 1700 BC. The black folks in Elam in Iran, probably beginning about 2800 BC, 3000 BC. Indus Valley civilization, same thing, from about 2700 BC, when it really begins to flourish, until the time the Aryans brought it low to about 1500 BC. I think that the most ancient civilization of China, as I pointed out, the Shang dynasty, which is the parent dynasty or parent civilization of China, takes us from about 1766 to about 1032. Civilization in Southeast Asia is much more recent than that. Again, the Aryan incursions are about 2000 BC. So I think that it begins in the BC period, again with Nile Valley civilization, and then the spread of the civilization. The Arabian Peninsula, the Sabian civilization begins about 1500 BC. And again, when the Aryans or Indo-Europeans begin their movement, this really reduces many of these civilizations. And a lot of them never recovered. I think the reason that Kemet was able to recover and flourish is because of its geography, the isolation. It is said Egypt is the gift of the Nile, and the Nile is the gift of Africa. Most of Egypt is surrounded by desert and by water, so it wasn't quite so easy to invade and dominate it. But these other areas didn't have that kind of geographic protection, so that the Africans in these areas were largely absorbed by the Indo-Europeans and later groups, to the point that most people are not even aware of an African population here. See, it wasn't necessary to, it was necessary to remove Egypt from Africa. But these areas, it hasn't been so necessary to remove it because of the African population has been largely absorbed. They are there in small numbers, but very small numbers indeed. But again, the early writers, Herodotus, Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, all commented on the African population, and the books are still available. They all commented on African populations in this part of the world, and 19th century writers like Delafoy And like the Rollinson brothers, George and Henry Rollinson, themselves wrote about it in their books. They refer to them as Kushites and Ethiopians and Hamites. Even Marco Polo, in the travels of Marco Polo, commented on black populations here as recently as the 13th century. Chinese scholars wrote about black populations in Southeast Asia. So I think it's very necessary for us as historians and scholars and race men and race women to begin to piece together the entire history of African people around the world. As Pan-Africanists, many of us have focused on Africa, on the Caribbean, on South America, on North America. But what I want to be a part of is the global unification of African people, and to be able to look at the hundreds of millions of black folk in Asia, the millions of black people in the islands of the Pacific and Australia itself. If we look at Asia in kind of a summary statement, because that is where the bulk of my work has been, and I'm very proud of that. I always wanted to do something that nobody else had really done before. And I think that what inspired me was the works of Diop, of John G. Jackson, and a few other folks, Rufus Lewis Perry, J.A. Rogers, Drusilla Dungy Houston, and some of the other folk who had done work, but not real comprehensive. They touched on it, they teased us, they whetted our appetites. It's as though they were saying, we want to give you a bit of information in the hopes that it will inspire somebody else to take it further, and that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to incorporate the African presence in Asia, Australia, and the islands of the Pacific, but particularly Asia, into the global African community. As the first hominids, as the first agriculturalists, as the first modern humanity in Asia, as poets and prophets and kings and queens, as sages and scientists, and even as servants and slaves, African people have known Asia intimately from the very beginning. Even today, after an entire series of holocausts and calamities, the African presence in Asia may number 500 million people. Now, who are these black folks? These are the questions. Who are these Africans? What are they doing? What have they done? These are critical, fundamental, profound questions that beg and demand critical, fundamental, and profound answers. And as Pan-Africanists, we must seek to supply those kinds of answers. And I think that this television program that we're recording right now goes a long way towards looking at that. Now, it's obvious this is too big a task for one person or even a few people. But I'm hoping, just like other people inspired me, that Reverend Minister Clemson Brown, Runoko Rashidi, and others will be able to inspire other people to go and do the real serious work. About 2 years ago, I got a letter from Oakland, California, from a lady who told me she was interested in doing research on the African presence in Fiji. And did I have any information? And I know that the black folk in Fiji trace their ancestry directly to Africa. They say that they came from Egypt and Tanganyika, as I understand it. And they sailed there perhaps as long ago as 50,000 years ago. And they have natural combs, picks, like we used to have in the 60s. They have big froze over there. And I found that interesting. So I called this sister, because I didn't have time to write, to tell her. And a child answered the phone. And I said, can I speak to your mother? And she said, she's not here right now. Well, can I leave a message? And she said, well, the person that you want to speak to is me. And I said, really? I said, are you the person that wrote me this letter? And she says, yes. And she said, by the way, I read your book, The African Presence in Early Asia, all 400 pages of it from cover to cover. And I have some profound questions I want to raise with you. This is a 13-year-old kid. And those kinds of things make you feel good, because you feel like the future is secure in spite of all the negative things that we see. We see that the work that Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Chancellor Williams, John G. Jackson have had, the work they've been doing has had an impact. And we are carrying it on, and it's going to go down to another generation.
I have to ask you one question, because it comes out of your summary. One needs, the question is, the culture of African people, because it wasn't Africa before, we call it Africa now, but there was no such thing as a geographical location as Africa. We were just kind of spread out on the earth. We were earthlings. But what kind of culture, and did it seem to be kind of a unified culture that the people in the early times existed, because it seemed to me that there was kind of a harmonious relationship in most cases. You don't point out any wars and things until you get to Aryan, so perhaps you can kind of
Well,
explain.
I'm sure that there were wars. In fact, we know that there were. But they weren't the kind of genocidal war that we associate with the advent of Europeans. We know, for example, that in Iraq you have the various city-states that fought against each other. And I'm sure that there were conflicts, and we have conflicts in the Arabian Peninsula. But it's not the kind of real murderous, fratricidal, give no mercy, expect no quarter conflicts that are associated in the historic period. That's an area, there's so many questions that we have. In fact, again, in the book, The African Presence in Early Asia, we should have brought a copy of it. I list about 10 fundamental questions for research. And there are certain things that come to mind that tantalize us. For example, there's a guy, a Christian, a man who's sometimes called the father of Christian history or church history, named Eusebius, E-U-S-E-B-E-I-U-S, who says that in the reign, I think I'm quoting him almost verbatim, that in the reign of Imhotep III, he calls him Amenophis, the Greek version, which is about 1375 BC. Amenophis or Amenhotep III is one of the most significant monarchs in the history of Kemet. He's so important, he's called Amenhotep the Magnificent. He's probably a greater builder than Ramses II or Ramses the Great, Usamadi Ramses II, very, very powerful man. He says that in the reign of Amenophis III, a large body of Ethiopians migrated he calls them Ethiopians, migrated from the mouth of the Indus and settled in the valley of the Nile. You have a tradition that Joel Augustus Rogers, J. Rogers, one of our greatest scholars, who I think did more to popularize African history than any scholar of the 20th century, a black man from Jamaica, born in 1883, J. Rogers, in one of his books, 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro, says that in the works of a British writer named Samuel Purchas, who lived in the 17th century, he claims that there was a man from Ethiopia named Ganges, who moved out of here, conquered this entire area, and named this river after himself, Ganges. There's Herodotus, who says that there were black people near the Caucasus, even today, but certainly in his time, which is about 450 BC, which he claims were the descendants of soldiers left there by the great conqueror Senusret III in the 12th dynasty, which takes us to about 2000 BC. He says Senusret III was a great conqueror, and he conquered all into Asia and Europe. And he left a garrison of soldiers to protect the areas that he had conquered. So all of these things are very exciting, they're very tantalizing, but I think that they have to be filled out with more archaeology and more first-hand research. What I hope is that through my work and others, that more people will want to actually go to Asia and interview the people, get involved in oral traditions and oral histories, as well as the archaeological work, so we can really piece together the true greatness of African people. I think one person that did an excellent job as a role model for that in Africa is Chancellor Williams. And that book, The Destruction of Black Civilization, really inspired me. And my dream is to write a book equally powerful on the African presence in India. You see? I think every generation should take it a step further. And that Dr. Ben, Dr. Clark, Chancellor Williams, and John Jackson, as well as check1, the people I call the icons, have set the model for their generation. And now it's up to us to take it a step further.
Brother Renoko, I want to thank you for being our guest.
Thank you, my brother.
On this program, which is called, by the way, Our Story.
Very good. And that's a powerful story, and it needs to be told.
You were excellent, and we really look forward to another session with you.
I look forward to it.
I can't wait for you to get back from Australia.
That's right.
And tell us about that.
Even from Cambodia, I'm going there in a couple months, and my brother, I'm going to spend a whole week just in Angkor. And what I will find there, I want to share with United African Movement, with First World, with you, with everybody. We have an exciting history And right now, we need something to excite us perhaps more than any time. So thank you for having me, and I hope to be back again.
Thank you. Let me get this light out before you burn up.
Yeah, I thought that went well, man.